Hey, Stacy.
It wasn't letting me turn on my camera until I checked about the recording. Oh
Yeah,
my God.
those modal dialogues are sometimes very, very irritating.
I'm so tired. I'm so tired.
What happened?
I just couldn't sleep last night. I mean, I really couldn't.
You're so excited for barn raising, right?
No, but I am very excited about something. In these past, I would say 4 days, I put together, I mean, yeah, I'm working on something that's really, it's something. Like I've shared it with people, they love it. But you know, I always try to get my T's and I, you know, my T's crossed and my I's dot. And so that's what makes me want to like rush through it. And I'm trying not to do that, but I'm really tired and I couldn't sleep. You'll appreciate this. I have skylights above my bed.
Mhm.
So, and I am very, very close to West Point by plane.
Mm.
By plane, I'm less than 5 minutes. If I'm even, if it's 5 minutes, I don't know. I don't have that concept. I know when we would take the boat, which is not all that fast, it was 20 minutes.
Mhm.
And when I go to my friend's house, who's directly across from West Point, we watch them doing parachute jumps and all this stuff. This really has nothing to do with, well, it could. But anyway, my point is, so the other day, I'm laying in bed and I look up at the stars when I sleep. And I see this really strange, kind of like triangular thing. And I'm like, let me get my camera. By the time I get my camera and try to figure out how to use it, it's moved to where the other skylight is. And so I go over there, but I hadn't had that shade opened. So I missed it. I didn't get anything a couple of days ago. So yesterday, I'm laying in bed and I see something not as oddly shaped like the other one. I did take pictures of it as best as I could. It was really just like, it would look like the brightest star in the sky. Wasn't surrounded by any other stars. But anyway, so I took my picture and I'm rambling now and I forgot we're recording. And the whole point is I was like, I should really close my blinds again. Anybody could be flying over and looking in on me. That's the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, everybody with skylights could think that, right?
Yeah, but especially where I am by West Point, and again, I'm already paranoid because of the hacking things that I've incurred, and you know, a whole bunch of stuff. So
20 minutes by boat is not that far. So
It's not?
probably way less than 5 minutes by flying. Hey, Glenn.
Hi, Glenn.
Hey, your beard and mustache are really growing out there, Glenn.
Can he hear us? Wave your hand if you can hear us, Glenn.
I don't
He
think
can't
Glenn
hear
is
us.
hearing us.
No.
Hey, now I'm hearing you.
There he is.
Just had
There
to
you are.
create the right contact. Hey,
Okay.
good to see you guys. So what's going on today?
I was just admiring your mustache and beard, Glenn.
Yeah, just trying to let it grow a little bit. Try a new style. Yeah.
Mhm.
See how it feels.
My style is no style.
I got inspired by somebody who said that if you have a beard, it's like a connection between the head and the heart. I think Jess Winder said something about that once, that there's some kind of connection that it exists. So I was among the inspirations.
Not to interrupt, but can you send Heiner the link, please?
Me? Okay.
Yeah, well, because I don't know how to, it's too hard for me to navigate to get it to. I'll tell him you're sending it.
Let me see if I can.
And
Okay, sent.
Yeah. And I have heard from Barry, so he,
I've heard from Barry.
yeah. So
Yeah.
he's
Let me just tell Heiner it's coming.
hasn't disappeared.
Well, we have been collecting topics. I have one or two or three. I know, Glenn, you had another very long, nice write-up. And Kayla has also had her topic that had been postponed due to her trip. Yeah, by the way, Kayla was here last weekend up in the Northwest.
Okay. Oh yeah, so you met.
We did. We had dinner together when she got here, in downtown Seattle.
Well, you didn't see the pictures, Glenn?
No, I don't think I saw those. Oh,
Yeah, she Facebook filters.
Right.
Facebook definitely edits and censors.
Well, I don't spending that much time on Facebook, so I probably just missed something. So yeah. So she's not having her presentation today.
I don't know yet. She hasn't confirmed. I was curious whether she was going to. And you have a topic, I have a topic.
I'll just say something based on the Facebook thing, because
Yeah.
I posted something hoping it would spark a new way of looking at something, but there was, so Neil deGrasse Tyson is doing like a master class. So I posted on my Speaking Truth page, just the idea that it's on how to think. And so I posted that, so many people need to learn these skills instead of charging them. Why shouldn't Facebook pick up the bill since they caused this problem? And I'm interested to see if I get any responses to that, because to expect people to pay to be like the people that need to see it are not going to be the people that are going to pay to see it. Facebook should be shoving it into the airways.
What should they be shoving?
Like, for example, this course is teaching critical thinking. That's if you look at Facebook as a world, and you look at all of us playing in that arena as citizens of that world, they should be training us to be good citizens, and to be a good citizen, you should have good critical thinking skills. That's my opinion.
Yeah, but isn't that kind of our own responsibility to teach ourselves that?
Maybe in the old paradigm.
Stacy's point is those who need it won't appreciate it. Those who appreciate it probably are not the ones who need it most.
Although we could use it too.
Of course.
It can't hurt. It can't hurt to always check ourselves.
Most. Yeah.
If it's a good course, that's...
Facebook is not a nation interested in having its people think. Facebook is an X other, you can name it whatever you like, but they're just interested in maximizing engagement, which they measure by purchasing and by clicks.
No, but if people were thinking using Facebook to develop ideas, that would be an enormous engagement, wouldn't it?
We're trying to do that here. We are.
Yeah. So what prevents people from doing that on Facebook?
The fact that they don't optimize for that. They don't make it easy. They don't make threaded conversations easy. They don't even share everything I post with all of my connections. I don't get to see everything that my connections post. They edit that. They filter that. They actually will send me to Facebook jail if I post something they don't like. All of those things are not good for collaboration and for critical thinking.
But to me, what you just said is very analogous to our society.
Yeah.
So instead of us bitching and moaning about it, I tried to put forth another idea to think about, because just like in our real world, if there's enough pressure, and if the narrative changes to push, and the pressure is there to push that new narrative, They're going to have to do something. I mean, they're already in trouble. Either people are leaving, the people that they want to stay here, or they're going to get in trouble because they're going to be getting sued and, over censorship or whatnot. So maybe instead of just hating them like we do in our Facebook world, we hate each other, maybe we can come up with something that's a win-win. But at least let's start talking about that possibility, those possibilities that might exist.
Yeah, I think we have to take responsibility. The users of Facebook, Facebook can't do it. The users have to decide, we're gonna use Facebook in this way.
Yeah,
At least some can use.
But I think we should also be expecting something from them, and we're not. And that's why I'm saying we should be expecting. Maybe they should, but maybe we shouldn't have to deal with firewalls. Maybe Facebook pays those companies so that that information is open to us. Why are we falling for the old paradigm?
One thing I expect from Facebook, when I write a response and I begin writing a response and then I'm interrupted and then I come back, then I expect that to still be there instead of them updating their page. And that's an unbelievable software bug. It's just,
Wow.
It's just horrific. Yeah, I can write a response, the beginning of a response, I can write for an hour, and then I don't even close the window, and I come back and it's all gone. It's happened several times. And
that is awful.
Yeah,
that's
an example of they should hire some software developers. But seriously, I mean, that's like so basic. Like it couldn't be any more basic than that. If they don't notice that I'm planning to answer somebody when I've already been writing for half an hour and I didn't close the window, if they can't manage to translate that into me having an intention of sending that answer, then they should seriously get some better analytical tools to interpret the intentions of their users.
What's the time frame on that?
Time out. Colin's had his hand up for quite a while now.
Thanks. I've been laughing at Glenn's pain because it's a user pain. And in the world of developers, that was so funny. That was so funny, Glenn, when you said Facebook should hire some software developers.
They should, seriously. Some people who know something about programming.
Oh my soul.
Because
well,
it's so basic.
we had that discussion. We had that discussion last week about affordances. We can review that again, but before we get on to the affordances, I would like to go back to the context of what is critical thinking on the internet. And I would like to back up a little bit and just say, there's people who are individuals who think for themselves, who are one area of people who are talking and speaking on the internet. And then there's another group of people who are members of tribes and are defending some vision or cult or whatever. And those are your sports team. I call it sports, but no, not to be against sports, but the mentality that people get involved with their sports team, it's almost more important. They buy the hat, the jersey, and put the stickers on their car, and it's all in with these sports people. I think it's a more softer analogy than picking on religious people, but it's the same mentality. So when Glenn was speaking, why can't people just X? My mind goes to the edge case. And I was just listening to a discussion earlier from Alex O'Connor. I think he's got a channel called The Cosmic Skeptic. And they talk a lot about critical thinking, and they're into philosophy. So they, him, and I think there's another guy in England, Rationality Rules. There's a few more that really take these conversations that people put on the internet and they break them down. And the one that he just did was, why are Muslims so sensitive to being criticized? Right. And that's a big thing here about criticizing. Well, you know, when you're talking to an individual, it's different than talking to a member of a group. So we can't just say, let's make rules for people on the internet. It's like, it's still tribal in whichever way you look at it. And I think here we have a unique situation where we have a bunch of individuals who are willing to think for themselves. So this is a good example for individuals to think for themselves. But people who are members of groups, they're not even going to pay a single sentence worth of attention to what we're saying. And all they'll hear is me saying something against their sports team. And then they'll want to, you know, the topic was Saddam and Rushdie, right? And you know, talk about banning somebody. India banned a book, whole nations banned his book. But then the guy was so hypocritical. I'll save my cursing, but insert please. The guy was so critical that he says that nobody should be able to read it. But guess what? You already know the answer. He read it, right? So I guess he thinks he's part of an elite group that can sort who can speak and who's speaking properly and should this book be banned. The only thing that he said that Alex agreed with that I can remember is that he said the proper response is a reply, not violence. But their reply is violence. So that's the problem. If we could learn to reply without the violence, without the bullying, without the lying, without the manipulation, and you're not going to get that while there's stakes. There's something at stake. And it would be interesting in conversations if you could put like a little container where the actual thing that they want, you put it there when you figure out what it is. So you could have a whole conversation with this empty container until you actually figure out what the guy is saying. And Alex nailed it. He said that they love their God so much that if you don't love it, their God, that you're in trouble. It's okay for them to. So he said, what if I said I loved my sister and I love my sister so much that, you know, you should love my sister too. They say, well, I don't love your sister. Well, if you don't love my sister, I'm going to. And you loved my sister before, and now you don't love her anymore, then that's a reason to have you killed. And they're on their talk channels like we are saying they're proud of that. They're proud of the fact. Now, I don't know how many people that represent, Glenn, but they're not going to be coming into this conversation anytime soon that I know of and be able to critically think. And the only way to deal with those situations is either ignore it or mockery or some kind of legislation. And that's what we're kind of down to. That's the global challenges I see. Getting individuals who want to create together, use Trello to not waste their time is one problem, smart people problem. There's the other problem where the conversation isn't going to happen in the first place and it's not fair. And I don't like to confuse those two contexts. And that's what I feel happens when we're in these conversations and we start talking about why can't everybody just? It's because everybody's out there waving a flag. That's why. So you got to figure out what flag they're waving and what they want.
Hey, call it. I like what you're saying, actually, but I think we have not yet gone through a discussion of what it is we want to talk about. What I'm hearing there is a connection between what Stacy brought up, the critical thinking class, and whether or not we tolerate, okay, so I'll just call it non-critical thinking. How far in the appreciation for critical thinking do we tolerate another's opinion to the extent that we just let a lot of non-critical thinking just flow? And I think that's actually a pretty interesting theme. Okay.
That is a really good question.
But I haven't yet heard other proposals for topics. So in an appreciation
let me just
focusing, I just want to make sure that, you know, we actually do go through that stage in this conversation. Yeah, go ahead and finish.
Yeah, sure. Just steamroll. Yeah, no, I was finished, but you just brought up his conclusion, and that was it. Because the thing was, they're asking for us to have tolerance and respect. And we will have tolerance and respect, he says, when you no longer have, when you drop the rules that if somebody loved my sister, nobody loves and doesn't love her anymore, that's not a reason to have them put to death. Or somebody loved your Allah and now doesn't love it anymore. That's not a reason to put them to death or gays. Once you drop those ideas, then we'll start to take your you with tolerance. Take you seriously, maybe not, but tolerate you, yes. So we're talking about tolerance and coexistence in that case. Thank you. So if their ideas are so bad, we can't tolerate it.
Okay. Glenn, do you have an idea or a follow-up?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of a response to your question. I think it's a really interesting topic that we're very close to here. Is critical thinking possible if you're a member of a tribe? That's one question. And then there's different kinds of tribes. And some of them are completely insane. Like, the example Colin mentioned, but there's many other tribes as well who are just totally insane. I mean, their belief system is so insane that it's hard to even believe that they believe it themselves. But it's a sort of a cultural thing. And this ties into a much larger topic, which is this topic of the culture wars and this economy that's been created around people going into so-called tribes, but they're not real tribes because they're not standing for anything and their belief system is just completely ridiculous. And it's difficult to even believe that they seriously believe it. So there's something else going on. And that's something else. This is a very big topic, which I don't think we've discussed before. And I think it's a very important one.
I do like that connection. And in fact, I'm going to pose another possible corollary / follow-up. And that is, tolerance and inclusion has, in my opinion, accepted too much of this my truth business. If anyone who wants to comes and says, this is true for me, and wants serious consideration based on that and nothing else, I find a problem with critical thinking and productive conversation on those lines. Now, if one replaces this true for me phrase with this is my experience, I am completely okay with that. I know exactly what to do with that. But the minute the word truth gets in there and saying true for me, and therefore it must be considered seriously, is typically the follow-up to that. I have a lot of problem with that, because if it's not questionable, in other words, if you cannot question it, and if you cannot follow it up and look at it from multiple different perspectives, you just have to accept that it's true for someone else, and therefore I have to take it seriously. How does that allow us to go forward with critical thinking, constructive, rational thought? And that is, I think, part of the reason, at least, why Colin reacts so much when, he sees woo or woo-woo come up, which I think I'm not really familiar with the exact definition of it, but I think I might be using it, somewhat appropriately. So I think that is a very important topic for barn raising and foundation laying. If we can't figure out how we do critical thinking and not tolerate non-critical thinking, we should accept that we're really without a foundation. Critical thinking should be one of our foundations, in my opinion.
Agreed.
And those who cannot do so, or those who insist that we not do so, or those who insist on truth being true for them, and therefore that cannot be questioned, are blocks to critical thinking. And that, I think, is a very important theme that I think we've been circling for 4 years.
Sam, is your question then, how do we relate to those people?
My question is, how far do we tolerate non-critical thinking?
Among ourselves or among people who are not even part of this?
Everywhere. We can't say, oh, that part of society, let's let that go, okay, because that non-critical thinking is okay there? No, because if we allow it there, it's going to grow.
It may not be thinking at all. It's
Yeah.
something
Think
else.
of cults as an extreme example. Think of religions as another example, which are somewhat cult-like, cultish. And I know I'm being extreme here, but I do think it's time for us to have these conversations. So it appears to me that we are circling and we're probably agreeing that this theme of critical thinking might actually be the focus for today. Without objection, let it be so. I see Alex and Barry with their hands up. I don't know who's first.
I've got a question about Colin's inference about the woo-woo and the believing in religion, what they call fundamentalism. Because everyone, no matter what religion you believe in, everyone has an idea of compassion and love. You know, how many times do you see people going like this online? Because it represents something that's beyond and higher than religion, religious dogma. It's something that all groups and all tribes can agree on. It's pretty obvious in critical thinking that love and compassion and empathy are things that bring people together and help us to proceed in a direction that is orderly and significant for the purpose we're trying to achieve.
Okay, so I'm going to interrupt somewhat, okay, because are you stating that as a truth or are you stating that as an observation?
No, the direct correlation between truth and the individual observer is critical in thinking, because objective truth.
I didn't even follow that statement. I didn't even follow that statement.
Let me interrupt. Objective truth is similar to the other type of truth, which is from the individual's point of view, not the scientific view of the consensus of the community. Do you understand the difference between the two types of truth?
I don't understand what you just said.
Do you know what well, do you understand subjective truth? Because before you do critical thinking, before you can do any critical thinking on subjective truth, you must understand that it's from the observer's point of view.
Right, and that's why I'm saying replace experience with subjective. Replace experience for subjective truth.
Yes.
Don't talk about subjective truth.
So getting back to Colin's comment about woo-woo, and the object of the team is to collect as many people as possible from the global population. If 80% of that global population believe in woo-woo, then you've regarded them as outside the scene, outside the picture of your marketing project.
Alex.
Wait. Time out. Barry's had his hand up.
Stop you right there.
Stacey's had her hand up.
We got to be a little patient.
Wait. I'm really going to try
because that's a
hey,
bunch
Colin, please.
Thank you.
Colin, there's a number of things that Alex said that I do not understand. Okay, so if we are actually going to practice critical thinking, that's why I raised those questions myself. Okay, the existence of this phrase, subjective truth, is to me almost synonymous with true for me. And I would really like to either really understand it and define it or obliterate it.
There's 80% of the world's population.
It doesn't matter that there are 80%. We're not talking about critical thinking.
I understand it doesn't matter if you want to collect a gathering of people.
Who says we want to collect?
In order to achieve a purpose.
Who says we're trying to collect? Anyone?
I said we've got a collaboration.
Hey, Alex, I'm calling that into question because you're stating a number of things as true. And I'm trying to understand that.
How can I answer you if I'm continually getting interrupted?
Because I keep bringing back this one point. Are you hammering this point of subjective truth as something we must deal with? Or are you going to understand that that is experience and not subjective truth?
I'm saying that there's a big segment of the world's population using subjective truth because they're observers. Their truth relates to them as an individual observer looking at the world.
They use the expression subjective truth.
20% are what you'd call not humanists, because humanists have a dogmatic approached, and so do
Again,
atheists.
there's another assumption.
But they're
we have to
individuals.
take one thing
Okay.
at a time here because
I'm
it's-
assuming.
Is this the Alex bullshit hour?
Okay, time out,
What
time
I'm-
out, time 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 out,
Okay,
time out, time
can
out,
I let me finish?
time out.
The part I was talking about for the person assuming things that they want to interrupt the session or the cohesiveness of the community because 10% or 15% or even 20% of them don't agree with the 80%. Over.
Okay, let's let that question, I'm not gonna respond to that. Barry had his hand up, Stacy had her hand up, and then I'd really like to have a consensus about what the topic is for today. So Barry.
Okay, let me just finish typing one.
Okay.
So I can do- Okay, when I was at BBN is that little high-tech company that developed the original precursor of the internet, the ARPANET. For a while, I shared an office with a chap named Oliver Selfridge. Now, I don't know if how many people would recognize that name. One of the competing telephone companies in the United States was General Telephone Electronics, GTE. And they had their headquarters just down the street from where I lived, halfway to BBN. And the chief scientist at GTE was a chap named Oliver Selfridge. And after he retired, he used to come by and hang around with us at BBN, Wolf, Brannick, and Newman. And in fact, I shared an office with him. When I say an office, I mean, it was a little cubby. So he was literally our, if he reached out his hand and I reached out my hand, we could shake hands. That's how close we were. And we had a lot of just random conversations as we're sitting in our, our little cubby office. And every once in a while, I would make an assertion as if it were the ground truth, just an assertion. And what Oliver would do when I made an assertion is he would raise an eyebrow and say, "What's your evidence for that?" When he had said, "What's your evidence for that?" what he meant was I was asserting my own mental model, what somebody might call a subjective truth or a belief. And he would challenge it very gently by saying, "What's your evidence for that?" And that brings back an idea that's very powerful and important to systems thinkers, systems scientists. What we have in our head are mental models. Mental models are crude approximations to an extremely fine and difficult to appreciate objective reality. We try to get our mental models and our scientific models as accurate as possible, but there's a saying, all models are wrong, but some are useful. That is, their departure from perfect objective truth is small enough that we can rely on them. So when people talk about subjective truth, what I translate that into is a mental model, which can be a graduate level, Dr. Fauci level mental model, or it can be a kindergarten level mental model, which is a very simplified child's version, but it's the best they have. And so when people talk about understanding and objective truth, our understanding reposes in some kind of a mental model, which can be very precise and very accurate, or it can just be very childlike and simplified. So mostly what people talk, all they can relate to, all they can relate is their mental model. And mental models, like I say, are always wrong, but sometimes useful, good enough. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Barry. That was good. Stacy.
Yes, two things. I'll be brief on the first. First of all, I thought we already decided that we were do critical thinking today. So I didn't hear any objections. So that being the case, and now I just lost it because Glenn asked a question. Can you be a critical thinker if you're a part of the tribe? So I wanted to say, yes, you can, but I wanted to explore I think it's important to explore the options of why you choose not to. Not that we have to explore that here, but that's the question that we have to start with that is worthy of talking about. The other thing, going to what Barry said, I had an interesting exchange. Somebody posted an insane meme. Somebody posted a meme about the infrastructure bill that was just passed. And it was one of these creative things where they circle it and they say, look what's hidden in the bill. And I very calmly pointed out, it just says that this is funding to test how this would look. And I got everybody like yelling on me, you liberal, you this, you that. And I brought up the idea of systems thinking and critical thinking. And with everything that anybody threw at me, I said, well, don't you want to know the answers before you argue about which would be better to do? And anyway, this is one woman finally, I asked her, she would say things like they, and I would say, who is they? And she would come back to me and she'd say, well, it's obvious. And I would say, well, if it's so obvious, why don't you just say it? And she would say, that's it, I'm not arguing with you. And she would run off. But this one of the more strong-minded ones said, Stacy Druss, I try to be patient, but you are literally insane. Is there any rational conversation we can have about the fact that you're trying to justify that people shouldn't be able to travel? That people who have to get a job and have to commute should have to pay for that? You tell Teresa she's bitching. There is really no explanation for stupid. Unfriend me, do whatever. But you are so fast in your stupidity that I can't, and I cut off the rest of the comment. So I left it alone because I don't want to leave the page because I want her to calm down. But this is what happens when their emotions get so riled up because they are capable of critical thinking, but they don't want to use it because it's not going to feel good within their tribe. I'm complete.
Thank you. Heiner, and then Barry, and then me.
Yes, hello. I'm only waking up when I hear the word mental model. So I would just like to give you one thought I had recently. We have a polysemy, that you have a different meaning in different contexts for a word. And this is also maybe true for images and also for models. So we have to reflect what is meant and how we index that. And that has much to do with my cognitive panorama, that you realize in an extra mode, what is he talking about? So you realize why he gets agitated, because maybe he is in another sector, on another scale, in another time. So anyway, I just wanted to at least say something. Bye.
Thanks, Heiner. Barry, you next.
I just have a very brief remark about sane and insane. As you know, I often do word of the day, and I often play around with definitions, sometimes very seriously, sometimes whimsically. And many years ago, I wrote a whimsical definition of sane and insane. So here's my personal whimsical definition. Sane means thinks like me. Insane means doesn't think like me. End of whimsical definitions.
Okay, I believe I'm next, okay? I ran across, and by the way, I like that. Okay, so let me respond to Barry and Heiner first before I go into my idea. Barry, I like that idea. We can extrapolate on that one. Let's put a pin on that one, okay? Heiner, I've often hit this theme that a simplistic way of thinking, in other words, a simple-minded person thinks about themselves, thinks about what they need, thinks about their concerns, thinks about their pleasures, their urges, you know, their desires, their plans. And I've often said that is a very easy way to be because the alternative is much harder. It's much harder to say, I am one, but exactly what's going on in me is also going on in everyone else, in Stacy, in Heiner, in Barry. And so to have not just one notion of what do I want, what do I need, what am I going to do? If I have N such notions, or N times M, you know, such notions, that's much harder, cognitively, much harder task, okay? But what you suggest, I think, takes that to, I think, a reasonable conclusion, which is how it connects into the theme that I'm about to state, which is people will react and be triggered and get emotional and get defensive when they don't understand and when they cannot explain. If you have deep understanding, and if you can explain simply, for example, as though to a 5-year-old, and have it be just completely simple and obvious to a 5-year-old. If you can understand something to that degree, the response is a calm one, not an emotional one, not a defensive one, not a triggering one, not a violent one, but a calm one, a, explanatory interaction. So if we do have this understanding of all of these other beings out there with their own needs, Barry often lists these 7 or 11 such things, that's going on inside a head, okay? Then we can actually say, oh, well, this person's thinking this because of that part in their past, and I can understand that. And now this is how I need to respond to that person. And if I have N such plans with how to interact with all of the N people that I'm interacting with, I know exactly how to do this, okay? In a conversation like this, however, it's difficult because we're not given the airtime to do it. So we got to do it either offline or do it via some other channel. So I do think that taken to its reasonable conclusion, what you said, Heiner, is a very good objective for us to be able to do. To each of us have a mental model of each of the others. And for each of us to try and improve that mental model so that our interaction with the other can be a productive one. Or if it's not productive, it's one you can avoid and not cause violence by trying to do too much there, okay? Or at least to understand that so that you have some mutual tolerance, some coexistence that's possible.
Sam,
I just want to bring up.
Sam, only a quick response. I think it is not about complicated thinking and simple thinking only. It is about knowing what it is about. Maybe, Kahneman was anchoring and priming, that you manipulate people by setting them in another frame of intention. And he also wrote about fast and slow thinking. It is very important that we realize and map and index the context and not just try to be through, if you think about painting, granularity, making it a fine stroke or a broad stroke. So I think we have to really go to multimodal, and that's what I'm trying with micro, meso, macro, and across the languages and continua.
Yeah,
Sam, you're muted.
I have a response to that and the others, but Sam.
Wait, sorry.
Start
I was
first.
not done, Heiner, but since you interrupted me, I will respond to you, okay? And that is that you read into my statement more than I was actually saying, okay? And I think that understanding with the approach of multimodal, I think is very appropriate. I was getting there, okay? But it's not just about complexity. My point about the complexity, though, is complexity is not easy. And if something is not easy, it's not commonly done, commonly, embraced. And therefore, we have very simple-minded people going around thinking about themselves, if they think at all, okay? And very few people actually, understanding that there are other entities as complicated as it appears I am to myself. There are many other ones out there. And that is the beginning of understanding that then leads to your multimodal recommendation, which I completely agree with, okay? But just understanding that complexity and that difficulty and that not easy aspect of it understands why it isn't done quite so much and understand why it's difficult. And oh, by the way, will be a skill set that we will need to learn and develop. And it's not obvious that we all have it. Okay, I really want to be careful about that. It is not obvious that just by identifying something means that I know what that is. Over.
Okay.
So I think we've got Colin and Stacy and Glenn lined up.
But I was going to respond to Stacy. Come on. I really have to break in here because this is so crucial. We're just driving at 1,000,000 miles an hour past enormous themes. Yes, this is incredibly complicated, as you say. humanity has been struggling with this for thousands of years, so we have to be a little patient here. But Heiner asked the question about clarifying context. Stacy mentioned an example. Is this a context where any critical thinking is taking place at all? Is any communication at all taking place in that context, Stacy? I think the answer is obviously no. And why not? Liberal. You said it. They called you liberal.
No, the why not? I'll answer you.
Yeah, there's many reasons.
The why not has to do with the question you asked, which was, can critical thinking happen within a tribal space? Because what I was looking to actually do is kind of demonstrate critical thinking, which is what upset some of the people there. And then that's how it started. I'm trying to, so there it couldn't, I left, because once I established that it couldn't happen there, I left. But the point that I raised my hand to pivot to was, I wanted to point out that this disdain we have for people that disagree with us, and when we automatically say they're not capable of critical thinking, that's the attitude that got us to Trump, because Trump went to those people that we mocked and we lumped together as none of them being able to critically think, which is not true. And he got them on board because he respected them. And if we don't respect each other, that's a problem. And I see Colin shaking his head, and I understand at this point we're at, it might be difficult, but I'm going to say for the record, I shouldn't even say it. It's not nice. Never mind. I'll leave it like this. There are certain people that I am willing to listen to advice on about how to treat other people, and other people, I'm not really interested in their advice because I don't think they're very good at it anyway. I'll leave it at that. I'm complete.
Right, that was a nice jab, Stacey.
Colin?
Thank you. So anyway, it's my turn. So
What made you own that? There must be something made you think I was talking about you.
because you get your tail up in the air, obviously, because now I want to go back to Alex. So, and also to the idea of critical thinking.
Wait, I don't want to let that just
And
slide.
to-
I don't want to let that just slide. Don't just say you got your something up in the air, okay? That's not necessary if you're going to make a point in response to another point. Why let that
We'll
get?
get to that after.
No. I'm
That-
saying
that-
if we're
that-
trying to
that-
practice critical thinking,
Oh, fuck.
that phrase is
Oh,
not
fuck. Could we
necessary.
not let the drama? Could we not
No,
let the
hey,
drama?
you're the
not
drama
leave?
there, Colin.
How about we
And I
just
shut it down. Shut
You
it
did.
down.
go,
shut it
let
down.
Colin just go to his original point. That would
Go
be
for
my
it.
vote.
Shut it down.
Go for it,
Yeah.
Colin.
Thank you. Like, we can discuss mine and Stacy's relationship later. So because I appreciate and do like Stacy and respect her on things that she happens to know things about. And it comes down to confidence levels, right? So she says certain things she has confidence I know, certain things she's not confident that I know. That's fine, whatever. Whether she's right or wrong.
Make your point.
it's
Go
a
to your
journey.
point.
It's a journey. Well, the
Please
point
be
is about
concise.
the exact same thing, but not with Stacy, with Alex. And so if you're in a group like Stacy was, she decided just to leave the conversation because critical thinking isn't working. So that's one choice. Sam says, is that enough? Well, in that case, what else are you going to do? You got a choice either to start mocking them or repeating yourself, right? So I wouldn't go to mocking because that should be reserved for politics and things where it's important, because you're being shut down, you're being dismissed, you know, and the people who are trying to railroad you with the big lie, they need to be mocked. And if you think that Trump is going to pick up supporters because we're mocking them, that's not why. I'll tell you why Trump is picking up supporters. Is
I'm not-
because those people, even
Wait, hold on. We don't know
Hey,
he's-
Stacy,
you're
let him make his point, okay?
No, but this is
Let me make
important.
my
He's
point.
making an
Wait,
assumption that
wait,
Trump is picking
wait.
up supporters. That's an assumption.
shouldn't
Why
have
not
brought
let him make
Trump
his
into
point? You
this.
wanted Colin to make his point.
That's right, but this is important. Do you
Go
know
ahead.
that Trump is picking up supporters? No, I
It's
mean,
not.
leave it
Come
out.
on.
Leave it out.
he,
They might
he
be
was the
getting more.
president. He was the president. Yeah,
He's
he
an
had supporters.
ex-president.
Okay,
Yeah.
time out. If this keeps going, I'm gonna have to like ask for 30 seconds of quiet.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you. So yeah, Trump has supporters and an appeal for people. That's what I'm speaking about.
Sure.
So the appeal that Trump has to people, or gaining supporters, or however you want to say it, is indicative, I think, of the fact that these people don't know how to admit when they're wrong. They don't know how to say, oh, I'm sorry. Let me rethink that. Let me reflect. It's like, oh, well, I'll just point my finger at somebody else. I know people like that who won't own it. Okay. And that is, those people are looking for a shield to stand behind, that they don't have to own things. They can just keep passing the buck. It's somebody else's problem, because we're good, like Barry said. We're the same people. And it comes down to that discussion I was talking about earlier. When those people who, and I say those people who have a strong religion and think that people should be put to death if they become apostates, those people who believe that, to be proud of that, okay, that is a situation where they do not tolerate our point of view. They are not respecting what I, like Stacy says, she doesn't respect my opinion on how to treat people. Well,
On certain things.
yeah, on certain things. Well, I don't have a lot of kindness for people making bad decisions in a global collaboration challenges area. If you want to be personal, that's different. I'm not here to be personal first and foremost, but I think I'm a very good person, very compassionate. I just don't think that the context for me here is to be somebody's social worker, really. If they need support like that, I can help them find it, maybe. I don't know. But you know, we're not a group that has an onboarding or a assessment area to say this person is completely loony. Let's have them talk to so-and-so who has experience in looniness or whatever. Like, so I guess the point is you have a choice whether you just want to leave, you want to mock, or you want to follow through. Here we have a chance to follow through. That's one of the magical things about this space. Like Sam can, you know, say, let's follow through. I agree with what Sam's saying. Let's follow through. And I want to follow through with Alex. Instead of Alex or me saying what somebody else is thinking, why don't we ask them what they're thinking? So if Alex says, you're just trying to dismiss all these religious people and don't want religious people this and that, that's all lies. What I am saying, simply put, is when somebody makes a claim to truth, like Sam is saying, with high confidence, and they want to push it in a global sphere, they got to have the respect that people aren't going to just take it on faith. That's what I'm saying. And if they have such great faith that they want to be super confident about it, they can expect pushback in a global situation. In a personal situation, it's none of my business. And if Alex is offended that it causes a critical clash in his mind, the things that I say about deities, because he has a personal, which I'm assuming I could ask him, but he has a personal connection with the AA group. And I think that's where his tribe is coming out. So if I was to fill up Alex's bowl, I would say he has a high respect for Alcoholics Anonymous. And that was hooked to this religion, spiritual thing. Well, that's great. But to say that I can't cure myself of alcoholism unless I believe in a God is a lie.
Bullshit.
So it depends who's pointing their finger. Well, I think I filled your container up. I think you're pointing to the fact that a deity helped you. And that is what Sam says is experience.
I didn't
That's
say anything
experience.
like that. You twisted that.
I've heard it several times.
Assumptions. There's too many assumptions.
Well, I've heard that
here.
there's some reason why you want to defend a deity. It's not for other people. It's for you.
Time out.
It's for your.
Hold on. You're actually projecting, I'm using that word, on Alex at the moment. That's not what I heard Alex say. That's not what I heard Alex
My point
say.
is, well, I've heard him say it before. We can go
But your
back and
point
find
was
videos.
understood.
Yeah, what is your point, Colin? Can you state it succinctly?
He did,
My
and
point
we've
is,
understood it.
One, you can just say, I can't talk to this person because they have a different point of view and they're not going to listen. Two, it's important in the public sphere, so we have to mock these people. They can't just get away with it. And three, we could do something that's bigger and actually ask the person, Alex, is that why you want to support spirituality? Because you think that it is related to some power that gives you in your experience? And is that truth? Or is that experience?
Let me
Is it truth
clarify.
or is it experience? I want you to clarify whether it's truth or whether it's experience, because that's
I want to
important.
clarify. I'm supporting the 20% of humanists and atheists because they have a logical belief and a firm commitment to their understanding. And I'm also supporting the 80% of people who have a spiritual belief because they have a belief that's personal to them. I'm supporting the whole 100%. I'm supporting the whole spectrum. I'm not trying to pick out one deity or one religion or an AA philosophy. So, you know, what you said about me back then, the last 10 minutes, was total, absolute twisted propaganda bullshit.
Okay, so let's not do that.
Okay, wait.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
I
so
like
let's
the
not
fact
have
that this topic is
conversation
heated.
here. Let's not
I
have
like
it here.
I like the fact that this topic is generating a lot of interest and engagement, okay? But let's still keep it hopefully productive, okay? And I know that people
He's
have been
down.
using this mechanism of raising hands, which I think is necessary in a forum like this, so I'm gonna respect that, okay? And as far as I'm concerned, I was next, followed by Barry, okay? So I'm gonna make 2 points, okay? Maybe 3. The first one, which is not one of the 2 I really wanted to make, is I was not hearing Alex saying what Colin was saying, Alex was saying. So I'm glad, and that's why I let Alex take his turn, by the way, to clarify that, okay? All right, so the 2 points I really wanted to make, going back to something that Stacy said, okay? And what Glenn and Colin have been saying, you know, you got these various different choices when you see non-critical thinking. Now, that's probably okay for the immediate context. But what about the systemic effects? What about the systemic effects of allowing a tribe over there to practice non-critical thinking in whatever form they want? And I'll just raise the possibility that that potentially raises extreme behaviors, such as, you know, stoning little girls for being raped, for example, that we probably don't want in the longer systemic global perspective. So the reason I asked this question, is that enough? Are those 3 choices enough? Is asking the question, should we tolerate non-critical thinking? And that's a dangerous question. It's dangerous because it can always be converted into censorship. It can always be converted into power over. It can always be converted into elitism. It can always be converted into any kind of abuse when a non-thinker blames a critical thinker for being intolerant of their belief. That is, I think, what has allowed society to get to where we are. There's been such systemic non-critical thinking. And people are equipped now with weapons far more than what they had before. Weapons like the internet, you know, weapons like blogs, weapons like YouTube that they didn't used to have. So my point is, how far can we tolerate non-critical thinking? And I'm going to follow it up with my second point, okay? My second point is this. There's a difference between is it true versus does it work? So when people talk about subjective truth, they're usually saying it works for me. I pray, therefore I have a better day. Okay, that works for them. Is it true in an objective scientific sense? That's not what's important to them. What's important to them is it works. And that's what I interpret subjective truth to mean. Is it double quote, it works for me. Regardless of whether it's, you know, subject to rational thought, experimentation, you know, objective confirmation, you know, peer-to-peer review, none of that matters when it works for me. The higher standard is it true? But on the way to, is it true? You have to go through, it works for me. Because historically, in my opinion, that's how we arrived at this notion of truth. Various things worked, therefore, we actually then attributed this notion of truth to it. But I think it's still useful to keep the distinction. When people say true for me, I will by default translate that to it works for me. Not to then just say it is objectively true, which is a different standard. It is a different measure. And I think it's a useful distinction for us to make. So thank you for letting me make those 2.5 points over. And it's Barry's next. Barry's up.
Yeah, I wanted to go back to a place where we had a little bit of interruption and ping-ponging. and talk a little bit about some more diplomatic and peaceable ways of handling those situations. Very often a person will make an assertion, an allegation, a projection, an accusation, and somebody will take offense at it, especially if it's an allegation about them, characterization of them. And so the question is, how do you refute that in a way that's functional and not just, turns to fisticuffs? One of the interesting examples I came across came from a world-class logician, philosopher, mathematician. He died a few years ago. He was a professor at State University of New York, and before that at University of Indiana. And he gave a funny little anecdote about the way to refute anything in philosophy. And his anecdote comes to him in a dream. So in this dream, he listens to every famous philosopher assert their philosophy. And in this dream, every one of them gets refuted beautifully. And so he writes down the refutation so he won't forget it when he wakes up in the morning. And in the morning, he wakes up to see what he wrote on the paper, this perfect refutation of everything that anybody can say. And the refutation reads, "That's what you say. That's what you say." True statement. And it carries both a notion that it could be true, maybe not true. Remember what I said before? What's your evidence? Or people will say, "Is that a fact?" Okay. Or they'll simply say, "I hear you," meaning, but I also doubt the validity of what you're saying. Or so there are ways to respond without turning it into an argument. "I hear you. That's what you say." So one thing we could do is try to practice some of these diplomatic ways of gently refuting things without turning it into a ping pong argument. I had a note on one other thing I wanted to say. Let's see if I can remember it. Oh yeah, this has to do with why do people invent stories with deities in them? And the answer to my mind, and this is sort of my own understanding of why people do this, I'm a big fan of scientific models, especially quantitative models, but also qualitative models. But I've also noticed that if I go into discussing a theory, I've lost 95% of my audience because they don't want theories, they want stories. People love stories, and they'll listen to a story where they won't listen to a theory. But if you're going to tell them a story, you gotta populate it with characters, because a lot of people will pay attention to a story that has characters in it. Now, if I want to talk about values, personal values, important values, one thing I might do is I make up a story, and I'll have one character who represents, symbolizes, and plays the role of embodying a particular value in this constellation of possible value systems. And typically there's an adversary, an opponent, who does not have that value, has a competing value. So people invent deities to symbolize or represent their most highest level value. That's all a deity really is. Some people love spoken conversations. They love conversations. Other people love to meditate, to think, to go in a quiet carol and think quietly and meditate. And if you're meditating about what value should I hold it highest, how should I take competing values and figure out which one I'm going to hold above the other, you might have a conversation in your head between two characters in your head that are arguing back and forth over values. And that's how deities get invented. They simply are storybook characters that symbolize what you're coming out with as your highest value for yourself, for your family, for your community, for your tribe, for your country. For example, we have the Statue of Liberty, because liberty is a high value among people who founded this country. Statue of Liberty is almost like an idol. It's almost like a deity. And we have a symbol for justice, Lady Justice. And that's like an idol, it's like a deity. It's a character that symbolizes important. We put them on our coins. You can find the Statue of Liberty or Lady Justice on the back of coins. So that's really what a deity is. It's a storybook character that represents some important value in your culture. So I may have a deity that represents becoming, because for me, becoming is really a big deal. So your whole life is about becoming. Other people say, no, it's about earning money. So Mammon is their deity. It's just a storybook character that represents values. I'll stop there.
But I wonder, are we going to answer
I'm
your
not-
question? Sam, you asked the question and nobody's followed it up. We're going all over the place, okay?
It's because we have to serialize contribution in conversation.
Yeah, but you asked the question. What
Yes.
Barry said now is beautiful, but we've heard it before, and I think many of us agree. But you asked a really tough question. And if we're
Which
going to go
question?
into that, we have to be more disciplined.
Which
What-
question, Glenn?
How do we respond to these groups of people who are in their tribes and who practice what you may call insanity and who, expose it as truth? Fanatical cults making enormous claims, outrageous. This is related to disinformation. It's related to the entire disinformation ecology. It's the entire left and right, the entire politicization, polarization, the ruining of the entire internet is at stake here, okay? If we don't have an answer to the question Sam asked, then I don't think we're gonna get anywhere. We have to actually try to answer that question.
Yeah, I don't want to jump in front of Alex, but I just want to say, you don't think what Barry and I have been saying addresses that question?
Yeah, I know, but it's also how much do we tolerate? It's like I think we have to go much deeper into it. We can't go into these wild tangents.
Alex's turn, so I'll wait.
Okay, I can answer Sam's question that Glenn's responding to, because objective truth is more important than subjective truth, especially if you're considering the mass psychosis of the population brought about by television and Hollywood. But getting back to the consensus in the lab, there's a lot of religious people in the lab, as well as atheists, humanists, the whole spectrum. There's a lot of people in the lab, and some of them are doing experiments and using the consensus, but it's not scientific. But even though it's not scientific to use consensus, it is a good indicator that it's reliable, because it tells you that one figure is greater than another. And when you're doing experiments in mathematics, you need to be able to rely on these answers, these solutions, and these difficult questions that are complicated because some people are dogmatically opposed to atheism, and some people are atheistically opposed to deities, the belief in an afterlife and the woo-woo. So if you want to have a group that's making progress, you need to be able to have some consensus on this issue, that most of the target audience can hold some kind of true, deep spiritual belief system. Some of it's dogmatic and some of it's fundamentalist, but most of it is just spiritual. You've got yin yang, you've got Buddhism, you've got Hinduism, that I could go on and on and on. There's a whole range. It comprises a lot of people, and they are the target audience we need to get together to have a consensus agreement about our project and how we want to change the policies of these governments that are destroying the environment and causing racism and white supremacy and discrimination. So that's where I want to go. That's where I think we can have a productive conversation. Over. Thank you,
Thanks,
Stacey.
Alex. Thanks. Stacey, were you done or did you have more before we go to Kayla?
Yeah, I was just really quickly, I wrote most of it in the chat. And of course, I can't get it up now to read it because something's with my computer. I just wanted to point out that there was a slight difference. I can't find it. When Barry said that you say, I forgot what he said. That's what I was trying to point out Does anybody see the chat where I?
Yes.
Yeah,
You
yeah. we
said the
see.
reason I think that's what you say, or if you think so, is preferable to the way I see it is this, colon. And then you wrote another thing, another 12 inches.
Right, because I hit it by accident. The reason it's preferable to say if you think so, or if that's what you think, or that's what you say, is I know you don't like when I use energy, but whatever you want to call that is still on them. Whereas when you immediately say, well, I think this, it has that dynamic of setting up it has this, Barry, you could throw the words in for me. It has
Ping
this
pong,
dynamic,
turns into an adversation.
adversarial. Thank you. Thank
Okay.
you. So even though it's a very slight difference, I think it's a very important one. And we often ignore these little tiny things that are really, really important.
Okay, so I'm glad it's my turn because I believe I fundamentally agree with you, but that was not what I was implying when I wrote what I did, okay? And this is a really interesting point because, wait, don't even react, okay? Because I'm actually agreeing with you, okay? And the flip is this. If someone says something, okay, which is their subjective experience or their subjective truth, and someone else, let's say it's Barry, says, oh, that's what you think, or that's what you say, okay? That's Barry allowing this person to have their belief and statement, but not letting it apply to everyone immediately, okay? So I think that's an effective way to interact with that. The point I was trying to make when I wrote that little one-liner that you reacted to is this. Instead of me just making this allegation or accusation or statement or subjective truth, if I were enough aware enough to say the way I see it, and then my statement, okay, that already alerts everyone to say, hey, I'm not expecting this to be true for everyone. I know that it kind of works for me, okay? And that would preclude the need for Barry to come back and say, that's the way you see it. So I was suggesting a behavior that is more self-aware, that does not require Glenn or Barry or you or anyone to say, that's just the way you see it, okay? But it allows that statement to still be heard. And that's what I'm asking is level up a little bit, okay? Get that level of awareness so that not everybody has to come back to you and say, oh, well, that's just the way Sam sees it.
Caleb, can I say
No, wait, I'm not done, okay?
When he's done, can I one line to respond to him?
So the way I am proceeding with my statements today, okay, are very much in line with what I have talked about before, in that a lot of what we are talking about is not just increased understanding, but it's a skill set. We're talking about skills, which we need to first appreciate and then learn and then master and then practice, or practice and then master, whatever, okay? But there's a way to understand skills, just like there is, footwork in dancing or fingering techniques in music or whatever, okay? We have to understand that collaboration is a skill set that can be identified, taught, practiced, mastered, explained, etc., etc. And to me, this point about collaboration being a skill set has been so difficult for GCC to accept that I do think it's worth spending time on and reiterating. I think that self-awareness is part of that skill set. Understanding other people's perspective is part of that skill set. Listening is part of that skill set. Being concise is part of that skill set. You may think I'm not being right now, but I'm going to just let that go. There's a number of things that we each need to appreciate, learn, practice, master, teach, etc., etc. And that is a global challenge to me. So thank you for listening to me. I believe Kayla has been here for quite a while without having said anything or checked in. She raised her hand. I'd like to see if we can let Kayla have some space. Kayla, you're on.
Stacy, you're on.
Thank you. So I agree with everything you just said, Sam, and I would like to level up even more and suggest that there's one step being missed. So first we agree, you say to the person, that's what you say. Before we get to your point of saying, this is how I see it, we then ask them, why do you think that? That is crucial. I'm done. I'm complete. Thank you, Kayla.
So I wanted to respond to Barry. I think that we create deities to connect personally. Like for instance, in Polynesia, there's deities to connect to nature, and I think that's wonderful. When you give something a name, especially a person, like a human name, you connect better to it. I also respond to Glenn. Thank you for bringing us on point with a very difficult question to answer. My answer is, I don't know. I've been put in situations before where I've been in the middle of something and I've seen two sides of it. Honestly, seen two sides of it. And I've been asked the difficult question of, you know, well, what do you think? What do you say? What do you blah, blah, blah? And without a person's genuine, their genuine knowledge of self-awareness, how they really want to hear something that could potentially be triggering and harmful for them, it's not my place. If I see that somebody isn't ready to, perhaps, if I see that they're not accountable or ready to be accountable for their actions, it's very difficult for me to give them my honest response. In which case I refer to, it's really not my place. And then it pisses them off even more. And then I'm like, you know, you probably should see a counselor then, you know? So I don't know. I think people really should be okay with taking complete accountability for hearing something that might be hurtful to them, you know, and letting it simmer. And then seeking out people that they will listen to, you know. However, if I do see that somebody is ready, completely ready to hear something difficult about themselves, I will try to tell them in the most gentle way possible. But that's just me as an individual. How we collaborate as a group is difficult. I was listening to Oprah and somebody else, and they were explaining IQ versus EQ. You probably know this, but you have your IQ for the rest of your life, you know, but your EQ, you know, you can grow, you can develop. And I think there's a lot to be said about that. And I feel like it has some type of connection to global collaboration. And that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Kayla.
I want to point out that EQ is very interesting, but at least for my cohorts growing up in the 50s and 60s, it was not a part of the public school curriculum. They did not teach emotional intelligence in any of the public schools that I attended in the 1950s and 1960s. And even in college, there wasn't much in the way of that. So perhaps if they had taught it in school, which is Daniel Goleman's big thing, that people would have developed emotional intelligence the same way they developed language skills and mathematical skills. But what I really wanted to get back to, though, was the leveling up that Stacy and Sam had mentioned, because the example I gave before, the cute phrase, that's what you think, I originally attributed that to Raymond Smullyan, the late American philosopher logician. But you know what? That same phrase, not in English, because that wasn't the language, that same phrase, that's what you say, appears in a 2,000-year-old text, verbatim. What's interesting about that is that different people translated it differently. One of the translations is, that's what you say. But there are other translations that don't quite have that same nuance. So it's not a new idea. Now, in terms of leveling up from that, which is a kind of a conversational version, there's the scientific leveling up. And this gets to whether you're dealing with a critical thinker or not. If I'm dealing with somebody who comes from the scientific critical thinking culture, I will say, is that your working hypothesis, or that's an interesting working hypothesis? And the question, what's your evidence, becomes what was the evidence pro and con to support your working hypothesis? And in particular, the follow-up is, how did you falsify all the competing hypotheses, including the null hypothesis? Now, if I say to somebody, is that your working hypothesis? If so, how did you falsify the null hypothesis? Only a very advanced scientific critical thinker will even know what I'm saying. And everybody else will take exception to it because it sounds like I'm being arrogant and talking down to them. So I would love to be able to say to somebody, that's an interesting working hypothesis. What was the evidence pro and con for it? And how did you falsify all the other competing? If I could say that, I know I'm having a fabulous conversation with another systems thinker. But if they object to that, then I'm in an adversarial relationship, and that's not going to get me anywhere.
Barry, I'm going to respond to you, and I'm going to try to do this gently. But I'm going to say it because I think you can take it, okay? It sounds to me a very Western thing you just said.
It is.
Because this notion that EQ was not introduced early and not taught may be true here in the US, but it strikes me that teachings about self-awareness were present in the Tao Te Ching and what Lao Tzu was talking about with, the sage, with leadership, even in Marcus Aurelius's writings, in Buddha's writings, even in As a Man Thinketh, a long time ago, maybe a century ago. So it's curious that you characterize it this way. I will agree with you that it's definitely not taught as prevalently, okay? But I do think that it's an interesting observation that hasn't accounted for these teachings in other cultures being around for thousands of years.
Oh, yeah.
I hope that was gentle enough.
I mean, American public schools don't teach anything which is considered theology. It's sort of against the law for the government to be teaching theology, so they have to leave it out of government-funded public schools. Now, if you went to a parochial school, you probably got some of that. But and so Goldman wanted us to have secular emotional intelligence taught, and it was not in government-funded public education in the United States, because it was sort of considered theological.
And not only have we prevented the government from teaching that, it's also eliminated, for better or for worse, for whatever reason, even the study of civics, social sciences. How often do you come across social science in an elementary or middle school or high school curriculum? I don't think I recall seeing it.
Yeah.
Or civics.
Right. They dropped it.
It was what I was taught. I mean, I had to take a civics class. I had to take a social science class, but I don't see it in recent curricula.
They don't teach you ethics either, except you can take an elective course in ethics, maybe in grad school, but they don't teach ethics in public school.
Okay, somewhat tongue in cheek, I'm going to say ethics was taught in kindergarten, okay? But it probably wasn't revisited since, except maybe on the schoolyard, go playground, maybe. Okay, Glenn, you're on.
Yeah, because where's the science of great behavior?
There should be one, right?
Where's the science of the good life? If I go to university, is there a department for the study of the good life and the practice of the good life? Is there a department for the harmonious functioning of the human being? The department doesn't exist.
Well, it's the philosophy, I believe, but
I've studied.
many would disagree.
I went to the philosophy department. That has nothing to do with any of that stuff.
I disagree.
Well, okay, maybe I was in the wrong part of it. Depends what you mean by philosophy, but academic philosophy, my impression was it's incredibly theoretical, And once you get into anything practical, it's outside of the field. But I want to take this back to the theme we discussed, because I think that this is among the reasons why there is this general distrust of institutions. And this general distrust is among the causes for why these cults appear, and why these cults become so crazy. I mean, I'll just say crazy, because I think according to any reasonable standards, it's pretty obvious that a lot of it is. So why do we have the emergence of the QAnon? Why do we have the thousands of, flat earthers? Maybe that's a joke, but why the anti-vax movement? Okay, there may be some good arguments there, but there's kind of cultish mentality that one can see in conspiracy theories all around the world, and it's an enormous challenge, and it's directly related to this question Sam asked about critical thinking, because when people get into one of these, let's call them cults, even if they don't even meet, but they're in this box, it seems clear to me all critical thinking is totally out the window in that context. They can be in other contexts where there is critical thinking and where they're capable of it. Maybe there's not enough of those contexts. So that's a different issue altogether again. That's maybe a part of the solution, that we need to create contexts where we can actually practice critical thinking. And I think this is a typical example, these meetings, of a context where we're trying to do something like that. But as we've also discovered, it's very difficult, because we may think that we're very clever, but we can have a lot of bias that we'll understand later. And we can get into our own kind of group identity. And especially if it becomes, political, or the stakes get higher, the pressure is even stronger. So this is an incredibly difficult thing, incredibly difficult. So what about the wisdom traditions? Well, there has been wisdom traditions, just like you said, all the way back to Tao Ching. I mean, I read that book a few months ago. It's obvious it's written by a very wise person. I see it many layers of our culture, that there is a wisdom that's developed, that's been transmitted from generation to generation. And what many have realized is that intellectual knowledge can only get you so far, and it's related to this basic truth, which Barry mentioned earlier, that a model is always limited. Thinking is always limited. It's not just that it's wrong, it's infinitely limited in a sense. It can be useful, yes, in certain contexts in relation to certain goals, but once you start generalizing from a model and try to make an objective truth, then the whole thing once again just becomes another kind of fundamentalism. So then we have groups which have emerged around spiritual contemplative practices, where they try to train their mind and use many methods to gain self-insight, to gain a freedom from bias, freedom from illusion, freedom from this partiality. And in that, from those contexts, religions have emerged. And as we know, many religions are associated with exactly bias, fundamentalism, dogma, which is probably the exact thing that their founders were trying to get rid of. So there's an enormous irony there. But it's also an irony that even many of the great sages apparently even knew it. They knew that these things I'm saying now, if this becomes institutionalized, then it's going to become the opposite of what I want to put into the world. And this has been an enormous problem, that if they try to write this stuff down, if they try to institutionalize it, if they try to make a group out of it, then after a certain time, that group develops into something totally different, something that's actually the opposite of what it was at the beginning. So this is a big problem. And then you have all the people who just think that I want to be spiritual all on myself. But it's very difficult as well, because they can get caught up in these cults on the internet. Now, very many of these people are very spiritual people. Trump followers have deep spiritual experiences and deep insights, many of them, and they're ardent Trump followers. There's no question about it. There's some people with enormous gifts who have been completely misled into something totally different. And this has happened all through history, we see so many examples of it. And this tendency to take something subjective and then generalize and generalize, we can see that pattern as well, right? So I think it's important to realize we're dealing with an enormous challenge here. This is something that people have been struggling with for thousands and thousands of years. How do we transmit this knowledge from generation to generation without it being locked into these dogmatic systems that are then captured by completely different interests and perverted? And then, of course, you have a counter reaction to these locked dogmatic fundamentalist cults, and they throw the baby out with the bathwater. They think, oh, that just seems like a lot of fundamentalism. Religion seems like it's just a lot of crazy beliefs. So I'm just going to discard all of that. And then they discard the greatest wisdom traditions that have ever evolved in human culture, because those traditions have been carried through systems that on the surface seem identical. And for someone who's not has an enormous understanding, it's probably not even possible to see from the surface whether it's a real religion where the fire is burning and the truth is the issue, or whether it's just an empty cult that's just about dogma, that's just about all kinds of fancy beliefs. That's another issue. And then you even get money into the issue. And then you get the fact that some people make money and make a living by faking that they have this great knowledge and I want to teach everyone else. And the internet is full of these wise people who have their own businesses, and they may have some wisdom, but they're also part of this system that makes it becomes mixed up. Yeah, this was a lot, but it is a lot. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Glenn. I was personally having trouble following everything because it was a lot to follow. But
Colin
Nice.
is blocked on Zoom. I just want to throw that in. He asked me to
Colin is what?
blocked on Zoom. He asked for you to unblock him.
What do you mean?
He said, would you ask Sam to unblock me on Zoom?
Isn't he in the system? He's in the system, right? He's in the table here.
I don't know what,
He's
so I'm just
present.
gonna tell him you're not blocked.
You're not blocked,
His
Colin.
camera's off, I think.
Your camera is off, but you're not blocked. Okay, Kayla's been waiting probably 58 minutes. So let's wait for Kayla here.
Thank you. I was trying hard to remember what I was going to say. But isn't it scientifically, for one bad memory, it takes 5 good memories or instances to counter that. And the reason why I bring that up is because I think there is just this crazy war on our limbic system here, and everybody's getting this bad crap fed to them and they're hanging on to that. And that's a survival instinct. And I think that's where the critical thinking kind of goes out the door, because, you know, when we experience something bad, our memory holds on to it so that we don't have that same experience again. So when you're talking about the conspiracy theories, it's easy to get sucked into that because, you know, especially if you've had some sort of manipulation being done to you by people that you trusted, by your parents, by the government, by the company that you used to work for. So I don't know what the solution is there except to have faith for humanity. You know, a couple of friends and I, and to continue to have conversations with, you know, people all around the globe. A couple of my friends and I last night, you know, my friend from France, my friend from Pakistan, another one from Africa, we all started having this conversation on humanity and the crazy things that people do and the critical thinking. And, you know, we laughed at some of the conspiracy theories, but they are, you know, very appealing. What was I going to say? I have no idea what I was going to say. But yeah, I mean, you just have faith in humanity. I don't think, like, for instance, with the pandemic, you know, I don't think doctors get in the business, you know, to gain all this money so they could kill people in the end, even though I think they, hopefully most of them want to save another person. And so they have this skill set to be able to, you know, operate on people or prescribe drugs or something. So, you know, when you put it that way to somebody who's been, you know, duped, hopefully they'll kind of think critically and think maybe there isn't 5 billionaires in the world that can, I don't know. Anyways, I'm just throwing that out there. Thanks for letting me talk.
Has Colin been, isn't Colin able to join, or?
He's saying that it's my name he blocked, HCK Foundation Totem.
Oh, it's a different account. He's trying to log in with a different account.
The Zoom system will check your IP address, I think, and prevent people from logging in twice over.
Oh, that's good.
So I think it looks like I'm next, I see in the thing. I want to go back and second Glenn's point about having very many spiritual people that are critical thinkers getting swept up in this. This is something I've been telling my friends, who many of them are spiritual in the real world, that I have felt that these propaganda machines have infiltrated these communities. I saw it firsthand. It happened to me. It's very easy to do because they come in with teams of fake people. You think they're real. You have no reason not to think they're real. You've been speaking to them. There's already a level of trust. Something gets said and all of the other fake people are agreeing with it. You have no reason to question. You have no it's just when you're not looking for something and you're operating from a place of trust, it can be very easy. The other thing is I want to say to the craziness of it, and I put it in the chat, is I just saw a story of a Q follower who, because of a conspiracy he believed, murdered his 2 little children. And it was so crazy to me. And because I do have a skeptical mind, I said, I want to make sure this isn't like some kind of fake news. So they mentioned that he was he had a surf school. I went back to the site. I saw when it was established years ago. I saw the picture. This is a real story. This was a sane man who was liked and respected and had a surfing school and a family, and he believed serpents were going to get to the kids. Yeah, there's just so much there.
Serpents?
Yes, I didn't go into the whole thing of what he believed, but the point is, if you're going to be connected to where you are open to having information channeled to you, as many are, that's part of our spirituality. That's our intuition or whatever. That can really be hijacked by a well-coordinated operation, which I think has
Yes.
happened in many, many, many spiritual Facebook groups.
Oh, yes. Well said. That was exactly what I wanted to
Thank you.
bring out too.
And I have to tell you, it's a scary place. You know, I am very careful when I do go in, because these people are also very, very tech savvy. And if you get in their way, you're going to be a target. That's my personal opinion.
What if we, let's say, created a space where we can practice critical thinking from a place of trust, do it transparently, do it better and better. And let's say we leave those worst places for the most part alone. And if we do go in there, then we go in very deliberately and we know exactly what we're doing. I'm wondering if this could be the beginning of an, not an answer, but an approach that could seem promising. Yeah.
Just real quick, like I had said to Barry in the chat early on the call when he was talking about system thinkers, I think the best thing would be to get two really good system thinkers, critical thinkers that have opposing points of view, but that are also emotionally intelligent enough to be able to moderate themselves to speak with each other. That to me is the best way to be able to hear their points of view firsthand and weigh for ourselves and use our own critical skills.
That's very interesting. But it's also often the case that they're not always willing to do it. I get an impression. Maybe it's difficult. Yeah, what do you think, Barry?
There's a couple of famous examples of what Stacy's talking about, but a lot of them are synthetic. They're not two real people. It's one person writing a dialogue with two or more imaginary people doing exactly what Stacy's talking about. Probably the two most famous examples in literature are the Socratic dialogues that Plato wrote up, examples of people having a conversation. And then more recently, Galileo wrote one with three people, and it was about the two models of the solar system, the old model that everything goes around the Earth, and the new model that the Earth goes around the sun. And Galileo wrote a Socratic dialogue with three imaginary people, three characters that had that kind of a conversation. And since then, you know, Lewis Carroll wrote some, Doug Hofstadter wrote quite a few of them. It's a very powerful technique, even if you're doing it with this synthetically constructed dialogue. And by the way, this goes back to this question of teaching ethics. I had a friend of mine taught ethics in college, and the textbook that he used to teach ethics in college was the one that Plato wrote, Nicomachean Ethics. And what's interesting about Nicomachean Ethics is not that it's about ethics, it's about why is it called Nicomachean Ethics? Why that name? And the answer is very interesting. A very prominent person went to Plato and said, Plato, I have a young son and I want him to learn ethics. Can you teach him ethics? And this man's name was Nicomachus. And so he paid and recruited Plato to write, it was Plato's idea to write an entire book on ethics just for this one student. this one adolescent student. So Nicomachean Ethics is a whole book teaching ethics with one reader, one student. But today you can still use that book to teach ethics to a college level population. This is why it's so unusual to be teaching ethics at a sort of a high school level. I mean, think about it. The very first example of a textbook on ethics was written for an audience of one.
But aren't we in a sense teaching ethics by the way we interact, by the behaviors, by the the totality of the way people act?
Yeah, role modeling.
Yeah,
Role modeling is probably the best way, because if you try to teach a theory or a thesis or a philosophy and you don't act it, you don't be the role model for enacting it, then nobody's going to buy it because you're being hypocritical. You're saying one thing but doing the opposite, and that's one way to nullify a teaching, is to not enact your own teachings.
So is then the reason why ethics is not taught at Western schools or universities, is that maybe because Western schools and universities are so incredibly theoretical, and that this whole issue of being is almost ignored?
Yeah, I don't know if it's because it's too theoretical. Maybe because other subjects which are more practical in terms of how to make a living, in the 20th century, for example, was the reason that schools were being funded by the government, because they wanted people to be able to function at a sort of a very mundane level. So you had to have language skills, you had to have some reasonable math skills, and so this very high level, kind of almost graduate level stuff was, even the arts, they got rid of the arts because they couldn't fund everything they wanted to teach people. So they got rid of music, they got rid of the arts, they got rid of civics. They never considered teaching philosophy. Those are all electives at advanced college or graduate level.
Actually, in Norway, if you're going to study at university, there's a half a year of obligatory philosophy that you have to study. But
Not
maybe
in
it's
US.
not like that in other countries.
Yeah, maybe in major universities like Stanford or Cornell or maybe Harvard, they're built in, but those are very elite schools, and sort of your land grant colleges generally didn't have that as a part of the regular curriculum. They may have been electives if you had a professor on faculty that could even teach it.
Well, let's take an example, like the subject of psychology is usually described as the science of mind and behavior. Now, do people who graduate as psychologists, do they learn to observe their own thoughts?
That's a very good question. I'll tell you, I took Psych 101 in my undergraduate college program. And there wasn't really anything in there about emotional intelligence. And when I first developed my own self-developed theory of emotions and learning, I thought, how come this wasn't in Psych 101 when I took it at University of Nebraska? Was I absent that day? And the answer was no, it's simply not in the literature. So I had to develop from scratch a theory of emotions and learning, because I wanted a computable theory, not just some narrative, baloney or bullshit. And it simply wasn't in the literature. Well, if it's not in the literature, it's not going to be taught.
That's why it was so appropriate that Stacy just laughed, because what could be more fundamental than observing your own thoughts if you're going to become an expert in the human mind and behavior?
Did you ever come across the word metacognition in any psychology course?
No, I mean, I studied a little bit of psychology at university, not that much.
See,
but-
metacognition is thinking about thinking, thinking about learning, thinking about emotions, thinking about the role of emotions in learning. That's called metacognition. Open up an undergraduate psychology text and look in the index and see if metacognition is even mentioned, let alone a module, a week-long section.
I would expect it to be mentioned some places, but
I didn't know this word until, I don't know, the 1990s. I think I finally discovered there's this word metacognition.
But the point I want to get to another point, which is why isn't the practice of metacognition, which has been practiced for thousands of years in the Western tradition, it's often described as meditation, why isn't this practice the foundation for psychology?
Ask Daniel Gold.
A professor of psychology should obviously be a master meditator.
Yeah.
Like, obviously, if you can become a professor of psychology and you don't even know what's happening in your own mind, that says something about the whole system. And that brings me back to the point that I said earlier, that maybe there's some fundamental flaw in the whole approach.
When
that
you
it's
took
disembodied.
when you took philosophy at the university, did they have a module on epistemology?
Yeah, they did.
Because
And
epistemology is sort of like, how do you know that what you know is accurate? How do you know that your knowledge is reliable? That's sort of the introduction to metacognition. But it's a kind of a limited level because it's not about emotions and learning. It's just about, is my knowledge accurate? How do I know my knowledge is reliable? That's the beginning of metacognition.
Absolutely. I took a course called Philosophy of Science, and I had a very naive reason that I wanted to take that course. I thought I would learn about the scientific method, and I thought I would learn about it so that I could use it in my daily life. That was my reason. So when I came into it, I took the introductory course and the advanced course. And basically what I learned was that nobody knows what the scientific method is. That was kind of this consensus, but there was a lot of things. Some of them were interesting, but there was, at no point was there any practical teaching of how to think scientifically and how to apply it.
Yeah.
Right. So it seemed very theoretical. It seemed like it was just sentence after sentence of theory pointing back to other theory pointing. It was some kind of totally theoretical exercise.
Yeah.
Very much of it, at least.
Yeah. I agree. It was limited in its utility.
Yeah, I just really, very quickly, I want to just push back on one little tiny thing, Glenn. I think I'm a pretty good metacognition. I am not a master meditator. So I don't know that it's absolutely necessary that one has to be a master meditator, but certainly have the same sorts of insights that you would get when you do meditate, and at least have tried it and be, I just had to say that.
That's a good point. I think one answer to that might be that some would maybe say, if you are metacognizant a lot of the time, in a sense you are meditating.
Possible. Let Alex.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say that everything, I mean, when Glenn's talking about something being very theoretical, there seem to be a lot of theoretical observations in some theory. It made me realize or return to the point that nearly every theory is based on a theoretical opinion of the researcher. So it's a non sequitur to call something bad or not contributive because it's theoretical. What you want is to get rid of those theories and establish a fact. Now, the fact can only be applicable to the observer, and then it's theoretical again. So you end up in a loop. And getting
Yeah.
to Stacey's point was good too, because we don't need to meditate for years to have an awakening, an epiphany of types, of some kind of realization that we are part of the global humanity. We only have to meditate a little bit. But some meditation, I think, is beneficial. I mean, when I was doing it, it was an awakening that made me realize best use to myself and others if I look at the facts and perceive them according to my subjective belief, and then apply a objective belief to that rationality. And that's my theory of truth. Over.
It's very interesting if you compare and contrast the word theory with the similar word theorem. A theory cannot be proven. It can only be falsified. So you, and the word theory comes from a Greek word, which literally means I behold. So in a theory, you can say what you behold, but it may turn out that you have a limited perspective and eventually it's thrown out. Newton beheld a certain model of the cosmos and it had a whole lovely mathematics that went with it. And he beheld that and it was very good, except it didn't predict the orbit of Mercury very accurately. And eventually Einstein said, there's a flaw in Newton's model. He oversimplified the cosmos and it doesn't make accurate predictions, at least with respect to the orbit of Mercury. And he comes up with a better theory, which has not been falsified. It may be falsified someday, but it still makes accurate predictions. On the other hand, a theorem can be proven, rigorously proven with rigorous logic and mathematics. And when I was taking courses in grad school, we had theories and we had theorems, and the theorems had to be proven. And the question is, what constitutes a proof? And one of my professors at Stanford sort of gave a whimsical definition of what you mean by a proof. He said, a proof is anything that convinces you. That's where meditation comes in. You try to say, is this theorem provably true? And you go through an exercise to construct a proof. And if the proof convinces you, then that's your proof, but doesn't mean your proof was any good. Your proof could be flawed.
And that's a whole big topic as well.
Barry, I put it in the chat, but I just wanted to say, you said that a theory can only be falsified, but can a theory also be supported?
Yes, that's the whole point. If somebody has a working hypothesis that's trying to become the standard model, the standard theory, your first duty is not to find all the evidence that supports it. Now, you do want to find evidence that supports it, because that's a reason to say this is potentially the correct model. But the most important duty of a theoretician is to try like the Dickens to falsify it.
Right.
Because if you don't try like the Dickens to falsify it, somebody else is going to come along and do it for you and show you up. Einstein comes along and falsifies Newton's model because it's too simple. It doesn't tell the whole story. And it turns out that the part that Newton left out is really important in the modern age.
Right. So are you kind of saying that the strength of a theory depends on its ability to predict the future?
Right. It has explanatory, predictive, and diagnostic power. And if it fails at predictive or explanatory or diagnostic faculties, then you look for a better theory and you show reasons to falsify the simplistic one.
But then I had an epiphany just now, because maybe this explains why so much of the university science is kind of disembodied. And that I mean that this way of thinking, it makes sense if I'm an observer here looking out at something out there, which is happening according to some lawful pattern. Then as an observer here, I'm making a predictive model of events out there. But psychology, understood as the study of the mind, and in this case, the study of my own mind, is the study of myself. And then that whole thing falls out the window. Because I can make a prediction now that soon we're gonna see a banana on the screen, right? That's a prediction. But the reason it's true is because I'm putting it here. It's an act of will. And that's a totally different paradigm from the paradigm of having a subject-object distinction where I'm a passive observer looking out at the world out there. And I think this is one of the reasons why there's a friction between some of the scientific thinkers and some of the woo thinkers, because some of the woo thinkers, they're not interested in predicting reality, they're interested in creating it.
Yeah, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. When you say, I predict there's going to be a banana, that's a self-fulfilling prophecy because you have the agency of making it come true. If you're only an observer and not an actor, you don't have the agency of making it come true. And anybody can observe to see if it's true independently. So if you have the agency of acting to change the future, then you have something called a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, exactly. Stacy, what?
I was just going to say that I think I'm right in the middle of a scientific and a woo thinker. And when I approach, I am not looking to just create. I am looking at the science behind, if this is true, then I would predict this. Let me see. Let's see if the prediction comes true. If it does, make another one. If this is true, keep building on it. Not look. It has to be different when we're talking about what has not yet been brought into visualization. We can't, we have to apply the same rules, but in reverse. There is no other way that we can study things that haven't.
This is very interesting. Now we've come into something really interesting. How do we understand that which hasn't even yet come into being? It seems that the classical tools of scientific thinking just are inadequate.
I think we
need
have
more.
to imagine the models and then test them out.
What's interesting here is that if you have a theory and you make a prediction, if the prediction is about the behavior of people, as opposed to the behavior of the non-living parts of the universe, I can make a prediction and I can write it down in a sealed envelope, but not disclose it. Mm-hmm. If I disclose it, you can falsify it. If I say, I predict that Glenn is going to have a banana for breakfast, he can falsify that. But if I have a prediction and I write it down in a sealed envelope and I don't tell him that I predict that Glenn is going to eat that banana today, that's probably going to come true, but I dare not disclose the prediction because he has the agency of falsifying.
And that was the issue I had that upset Colin, that I could not explain everything I wanted to do because it just would have wiped out the whole science behind what I was predicting might happen.
This is why you have double-blind experiments in psychology and medicine, because if you disclose what's going to happen, then people have agency to either make it come true or to falsify it. And you don't want that to confound the study. So when you volunteer to be in a study, often it's double blind. Otherwise, when I was in grammar school, we did a module on nutrition, and we were supposed to keep a record of what we ate every day. That week, I ate very well. I had a very balanced diet that week, but only that week, because I knew that it was a study, and I basically.
And your awareness was there.
Yeah. So my behavior changed because I knew that we were going to make this record and turn it in. And I didn't want to look like I'm eating junk food all the time. But the week after that, I'm back to eating junk food.
Sam wrote something in the chat. Experiments either support or falsify. Falsification needs only one result. Support is insufficient to prove. This is what we spoke about.
Yeah, or to adopt, not so much to prove, but to adopt as a reliable model.
Yeah.
Because you don't really prove a model, you only adopt it as useful and reliable until it becomes unreliable, which eventually will, especially if it involves living and learning people. Because people can learn and then they can turn around and change you're predicting their behavior. This is called reverse psychology on children. If you predict their behavior, that can cause them to reverse their behavior. That's
exactly.
It's a trick. So reverse psychology sort of is the example why you cannot predict human behavior, because the other person can either please you or displease you by their own volition.
Something fundamentally unpredictable, isn't it?
Correct.
Is that affected by the bias of the participant in the research if they're not in a double-blind research, because they have an awareness of what the objective of the research is about, and they'll use that, that'll become a bias, and their contribution will be worthless. Yeah. So the double-blind test.
I've run into situations where, as a science educator, I can come across people who want to falsify the value of science education. And so they can intentionally not learn or learn the opposite, quote, that is, enact the opposite, so as to falsify the practice of doing science education. And I had to come to realize that there are willing participants to say, I do want to learn something, and I want to have you be my science counselor, my science educator. There are people who say, I don't want that. I'm going to learn on my own. And anything that you teach or preach, I'm simply going to do the opposite or not do it. And they can do that. I mean, you sort of realize that you can't just assume the role of an educator without consent of the person wanting to be educated by that person.
That's true. Stacey, I think I have something.
Yeah, I do. I was trying to look up the name of this systems thinker and I can't think of it, but his article was "Simulation is not the answer." And I wanted to throw out a theory off of that. And my theory is that the reason simulation and the way he was explaining it has not given us the answers that we want is because of the notion of time. And not just human, the notion of time and the fact that we adapt to our circumstances. And so at the point where the simulation is set up, the inhabitants of that experiment may not be acting in the same ways as they did in the beginning. That would be the emergence part of it. And that's why I try very hard. And I think there's some people in the groups, people like Doug, that tried to slow things down so that we could slowly see how things are emerging, so we could stop and restructure, start again, stop, not just, what is it, run fast and break shit? What is that thing? We got to move away from that. And those people, brilliant as they may be, need to learn some things about what it's like to become part of a system and to have the ethics of a systems thinker.
Yeah.
And with that, I'm complete.
What was that about the run fast and blink?
That's Zuckerberg.
That's something we should not be doing.
Yeah.
Well, that's Facebook had this slogan in the beginning: run fast and break things. And it's part of a mentality in Silicon Valley that you want to try things and then you pivot. Yeah. Instead of trying to create the perfect solution, you try to create a solution that's decent. Yeah. You test it and then you improve it sort of along the way.
That,
And he
what about if I
succeeded
had
in
something-
breaking the social network. He made it
Um,
dysfunctional, successfully made it dysfunctional.
I might have found something that works, but because I was running, not walking, I broke it.
Yeah, that's also part
Or
of
you
it.
missed something. You missed something that left out part of what we're gonna need.
Has
Okay,
Colin
I'll jump in.
returned? Colin, yeah, you're
Yeah,
back.
I got my hand up there, but I don't think anybody sees it. I'm having technical difficulties, so we're anyway. I just like to make a comment though. When it comes to, I assume we're still talking about critical thinking and how one allows uncertainty into the conversation, really, and that's what you have to do. You have to allow uncertainty into the conversation. But when someone's bringing in something unknown, but they're cloaking it as certain, that is the inflection point of hold on, let's back up and say, now how confident are you that what you're saying right now, you're certain? I feel you're bringing some uncertainty into the conversation. You feel you're bringing certainty into the conversation. So that's the contention point more than the information. Let's give an example. The government is chipping people by putting stuff in the stuff that's supposed to be keeping, I'm trying not to get this, well, I don't know if YouTube and Facebook would block this, but there's certain words you have to be careful not to say, because if we monetize this video, it will be one that can't make money in the future for the group, right? So some people out there actually think that it's a good idea to not get the poke, they say. You know what I'm talking about, people? Like, how do you deal with that? Like, that affects us. That's not somebody going home and deciding that if I believe in a higher power, I have the strength to do better in my life. Great for them. But that's them deciding, and I think that I'm certain that I'm right, therefore I'm going to go against scientific evidence of things that people have gone through. I don't know how many people in this group, or actually, I'm from a different country, so we got a vaccination and it leaves a scar on your arm. It's, when you're a kid, so you grow up and everybody has this little scar on the side of their arm where they got vaccinated. It was just a thing in life. I never even thought about it until somebody mentioned it a couple of weeks ago, that, it's just assumed. Now, that trust we have in science, I don't know if it's misplaced or not. I assume it's not, right?
Oh,
But that same trust that we have is expected to be applied to other things.
but I
And
think
like
that
Barry
before you,
says, has it gone through the critical validation? Has it gone through the, like Alex says, the double-blind tests?
yeah,
Right.
but before you came in, Colin, I think we know well what you mean here. But before you came in, there was a very important point that came out, and that is that a lot of the theories that are considered scientific, they seem to suppose and begin from a subject-object separation, where the subject is the observer who makes a prediction about what will happen out there. And that is a very different thing from making us claim that is intended to become a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's a whole different paradigm. And I think this is often...
If you want to believe something, you can.
If I believe that I'm going to get up at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning, and I believe that so goddamn strong, like more than anything, it's probably gonna turn out to be true, because I'm probably gonna get up at 6 o'clock in the morning. If I'm absolutely convinced I'm gonna get up at 6 o'clock in the morning tomorrow, I'm probably gonna do it.
That's the same prediction that that's the same kind of prediction that if I went to a certain country and put up a little information booth about critical thinking and why someone should second guess their religions without taking it all on face value, because there's a lot of good stories, but if you're a fundamentalist, you probably haven't really critically thought about this. And so if you're a fundamentalist, please sit down and let's have a friendly conversation about critical thinking and confidence levels.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Do you
But
know you
Sam
can-
asked,
Okay, you
yeah,
can
but
do that in
Sam
the
asked the
United States,
question.
but you can't. Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, he has the question.
So that's
That's
the
in
point.
intent, but is that belief? And I think
It's
the
a global
answer is yes.
context.
I think the answer is yes. A
What?
lot of
It's a-
beliefs,
What?
a lot of beliefs are just this. They are intended to be self-fulfilling prophecies. People believe things, and the belief system has an anticipation of changing reality, even if they're not even conscious of it. So I think that a lot of beliefs.
Are you talking about justified bullying?
No, I'm talking about a lot of beliefs that people have, which seem irrational. The reason they have them is because they are intended to change reality. And it's a totally different
Bringing
paradigm.
ideas forward.
I think it's important to realize this. This is a totally
There's a
different
difference between
paradigm.
personal.
Yeah.
You guys,
So
I've been away
let's
for a
go back
while,
to
but is this ping ponging or is this?
No, we're into something really crucial here. This is crucial. If we
Can I
get
have a
this,
go?
we made progress.
Can I add my
Okay,
2
well,
cents?
I hear Alex. What else, though?
Because
ahead.
the consensus is amongst not only fundamentalists but also atheists, the scientific community. The consensus is that 80% of the population is a bigger proportion than a small 20% of the population. We understand this is a fact, and nobody disagrees with it, except Colin.
Heliocentricity was that way. Nobody believed that the Earth went around the sun, but it's true.
Yeah, but this
And
is
we all believe it now.
2021. This is 2021, and now we understand we can use a
I'm
calculator.
just saying, man,
We can
Sam
use a
already said
calculator
today.
to prove
Sam
it.
already said today. Sam already said today that the amount of people that believe in something doesn't make it true. When I say it, you object. When he says it, you just let it go by.
And what about if we observe the machine counting?
Truth is not related to the number of people that got some cockamamie idea.
I didn't say it was. I'm saying if we want to bring the 80% onto our
Roll back.
side, if we want to roll back the religious bias that's in their belief systems, we need to roll them back onto our side. And you can't do that without convincing them that facts are important and truth is important. Subjective truth just as important as objective truth in the wider sense of the community. So, I'm saying that we need cohesiveness to bring a community together and have the team working on the same focus idea, the same project that's going to take us forward and not cause disruption.
I
and
do agree. I
confusion.
do.
So
I do agree with that. I totally agree with that.
That means, well, then stop talking about woo-woo, because you're knocking 80% off the shelf.
But can we
No,
please
Sam
follow
brought
this
that up.
thread? Can we please follow this
Sam is
thread?
the one that
Because
brought that up today.
we're really close to something here. We're really close to something here. A lot of the
Forget
stuff that
about
falls,
again. That's going to distract
a
you.
lot of the stuff that falls under the umbrella of woo is created with the intent of transforming oneself. Is this clear?
Maybe.
Well, it is. A lot of that language.
It's meant for something. And maybe it's meant for comfort and explaining things unknown, because people need comfort in explaining.
No, but but
a
that's
lot
just
of
a
stories.
superficial level.
You tell
That's
that to
just
children. You say, "Oh, don't worry, that wind is just such and such." It really comes down to what people are comfortable with and what they can handle emotionally.
I know all that. I know that, but that's just on the surface. I'm talking about the real stuff.
I think
Well, I think we're emotional first. Go ahead,
But-
Stacy.
Some of that stuff is about transforming oneself. That's why the deities have this significance. That's why the religious myths.
I think becoming is for everybody. I think Barry's
Yeah.
right about becoming. Anybody that doesn't realize that life is about becoming and becoming the best that you can be, whatever that means, you don't want to be the
That
worst you can be, do you? It's kind of a, go ahead.
Stacey?
Yes, so I want to go back to your original very simple question, Colin, as it relates to conversations And how do we deal with these people? And I've brought this up before. It's something very simple. So somebody makes a claim that is outlandish. The first step is that absolutely true? If they say yes, let's put that aside for a minute. If they say no, then the answer is, well, can you leave that part out and continue on with your point? Okay, so that would go for like a person that is a woo person. And let's say they said something and you said, do you know that for certain? A critical thinker is going to say, well, no, I don't know it for certain. That's what I think. So the idea would be, leave that alone for now, but finish the rest of your point, as opposed to if somebody says yes. Now, if they say yes, then you ask them how. If they can't answer, move on. Don't bother having these higher level conversations because you haven't even identified somebody who's capable of critical thought. To me, the first identifier of somebody who's capable of critical thought is somebody that is capable of questioning what just came out of their own mouth.
Sense.
They should know what they're
So
talking
I'm
about.
going to go
yes.
next.
Care about
Yes.
should.
Sam,
I'm going to go next
good to see
since
you.
it's already after the top of the hour, and just treat this as a little momentary bubble. And then I'll return you to your previously programmed conversation here. And that
This
is
is the genie speaking.
did we focus today? Did we stray inappropriately? Did we stray appropriately? What was the context? Was moderation effective? How could it have been better? Did I learn anything? Did we learn anything? Was sense made? Was my vision augmented? Was our co-vision augmented? Was movement achieved towards coexistence? Was my memory augmented? Was our collective shared memory augmented? What did we co-create? Were agreements proposed and or adopted? Did I agree to take specific action? And if so, what and by when? And what does done mean? Were triggers
What does
handled
done mean?
appropriately? Was anyone overly verbose? Was anyone not heard that should have been heard? And did I have fun? Did we have fun? Thank you.
Good questions for reflection.
I didn't contribute.
By the way,
with
I'm
my
in and out
answer.
because I have a house guest who's moving out. They've been here
But
for a week. And so
Sam-
that's why I'm a bit.
Sam, while you're here, you asked a question and Colin asked a similar one, which is how do they make this strong claim? So I just want to throw something out. So what if, this is a what if thing, right? So what if somebody else makes a strong claim that sounds preposterous and I just let them say that? I don't need to respond to it. If the context is such that a meaningful conversation seems to be possible, then maybe I will engage. A little bit what Kayla talked about earlier. If it doesn't, I just leave the scene. In the meanwhile, my focus is on learning to think better and maybe also learning with a few others who are also dedicated to learning to think better. And when we're gathered in that context, which is a totally different context, then maybe we can challenge each other much more and go a lot deeper and question a lot deeper and gain a lot of more insight. And if that is my response, at least that seems like a response that makes some sense, because I'm not giving fuel to the craziness. Yeah, what do you think, Sam?
Are you looking for a response from me?
Yeah, I would love to hear what you think, because you
Okay.
asked about this earlier.
Here's my quick response. I think that's okay in the short game. I think it's insufficient in the long game. See, there's me, there's you, okay? And if you have made a preposterous claim, okay, then I can choose whether or not to engage, whether or not to ask Stacy's question, what do you mean by that, okay? So that can be the immediate. The thing that I think is interesting to consider is what is the long-term effect? If you have millions of followers and you are saying something preposterous and you have influence over those millions, to me, if I'm thinking systemically, that would be damaging to the collective cause. So we need to assess that. If you're just on your own, you're living in your own place, you're not harming anyone, you're just muttering to yourself, and I just happen to catch one of these, insane, preposterous mutterings, you're not going to affect anybody. I don't need to really, waste my time and energy on trying to prevent that from spreading.
Right. So it's
But there's some judgment required here, and that judgment requires some level of transparency. If you've completely hidden your influence, like if it's, for example, if you were Q and I didn't know that, okay, and I just let you go, I didn't have sufficient information to actually say, hey, I should have done something differently, right? I'm hoping that's enough of a response to you.
Right. So it's like if somebody has a big microphone, like Brett Weinstein, he's got a lot of followers and he's been asking a lot of questions about the vaccines and he's received a lot of criticism for that. I think that's a good example. And he is being challenged and he's being challenged quite well,
right.
I think. And somebody should do that. I agree with that.
So anyway, hopefully that's a meaningful response.
Clarification question. Glenn, when you say he's being criticized, do you mean he's being questioned or he's being scolded?
Well, both. Yeah.
Because I'm all for I think the questioning is crucial, and it's hard to question someone that has, a higher degree of status, which is what I meant when I said, let's stop creating leaders. Criticism, no, that has to be thrown out. But the questioning is so important. We have to be able to question our own teachers in elementary school. We have to be able to say, is that, we have to teach people how to question, but we can't do that if we have these dictators, whether it be in a classroom or in a family, that says, because I said so.
Right, he's being challenged by his peers as well, like Sam Harris, for example.
I'm speaking generally. I just want to know what you meant.
But those two, they have a good relationship. They have a friendly relationship from before, but strongly disagree.
That's good.
It's a big discussion, but it's also a lot of scolding. And unfortunately, I think.
But you know what the bigger problem is? And I haven't seen that. The bigger problem are the audience members that aren't able to figure out where each piece fits. And so they take one thing, twist it into something else, and run over to Facebook with it and to the meme machine.
Sorry to interrupt, but that was my question to Barry when we were watching the Sam Harris video. And him and Sam Harris and Deepak were going at it with woo and fire. And I looked at Barry and I said, what do you think the audience thinks? And Barry says, well, let me try to figure out what they're talking about first. And I said, well, that's good to try to figure out what they're talking about. But what do you think the audience thinks that they're talking about? Like, who is the audience swayed to go home and Facebook about? And that's the subjective truth. And, and when you go to different cultures, you go through different norms of what's acceptable. So if you're in a culture, then you kind of got to go with an open mind with their norms. But I'm saying here in this space, this GCC space is agnostic to those things. We're able to look above and take the stories of a culture, take the good messages out and bring them ahead. Let's not argue about whether it actually happened, whether there's actually a God, because that, as Stacy said, is a conversation which helps her filter people out. If they say you need God to be good, then that's a filter for her, if I understood her correctly. And to me, that's kind of a filter too.
Don't use that example because you're missing a part of it. But yes, you understand what I'm saying.
Well, there's more to it. It's all plastic words, as Heiner says, right? Until we actually understand what we're talking about. So if we built together the the bright side of what we're trying to say, where it's actually important, where it actually moves forward and means something, then we can challenge those things as opposed to trying to defend the whole canon of history because you have a feeling in your heart that, you know, for example, what do I do when someone like Jazz comes to the group who has high spirituality, seems to be very scientific, but wants to meditate? I guess if I'm interested, see if there's something to learn there. But if he told me, look, if you don't meditate, you're never going to be a good scientific thinker, then we'd have to all discuss that that's not true, right? Or there's all kinds of meditation, or, you know, now we're into the Big Bang discussion about, you know, what came first, the chicken or the Big Bang, right? And so Alex says, let's talk about some important things. And I'm saying, let's shine our stories, whether they include a little woo or not, on the important things and understand that what's important in it so that we can help each other grow that thing and not some historical story that may or may not be related depending on what culture you're in. That's the point.
That's part of the new culture that can be created.
Well, and when you come across people who are so arrogant that they have the story, and if you don't take their story, then you're not worthy. I think you just have to ferret that out through a few questions, like Stacy says.
Stacy
Like,
said
are we
it
going
well
to have
now.
a fair conversation?
A common red flag is when people speak in absolutes. That's a red flag. Then they're not in this context. This is a learning context. So if people speak in absolutes,
Well, that's just the black and white of it.
There's no
That's the
moderator.
black and white of it. It's a good place to start.
Nobody moderating.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Al.
Alex, yeah.
I wanted to mention the fact that there are things we don't know. If you put the speaker view on, pin my view to speaker view, you'll see the background image where it talks about the blind spot. The blind spot in our thinking. It comes from the things we don't know that others can see.
Right.
And the way to get around that is a simple process. You know, it's not difficult. Anyone can do it, I believe. And Colin's talking about the woo-woo, the God that doesn't exist. But if you're out in the universe looking at Earth and all the cultures on our planet, you can see that a lot of them are talking about this thing called God. So it exists for them, even if it's only a concept. And it's a concept that comes from critical thinking. The fact that compassion and humility and empathy are things that benefit humanity is obvious to even children. So the critical thinker should be able to accept the fact that there are going to be people who have fundamentalist beliefs, deep-seated religious beliefs, and if you're not one of them, you're not worthy. How do we get that? That I'm talking about 75% of the world's population. How do we get them people on our side in our team? Over.
I don't know about getting people on our side, but I'm thinking about what is the conversation that we're having, and is that part of the scope? Because it's important. But there's many things that are not part of the scope of the conversation I'm having at the moment. And if we want to change the premise to that particular view of learning and education and storytelling, then we can. But I'm saying 90% of the time in this forum, I'm in a different conversation than that conversation. And can we characterize the different conversations we could have so that we could respect them, as opposed to saying, that's not important, let's talk about this. Like, can we visit the conversations? And that's what I'm saying, shine up what's important. We'll go talk about it, not losing sight of what's important. And then if people choose the wrong words and they choose, to slip in a few God words there.
But seriously, nobody's doubting this is important, right? What we discussed today, come on, it's obviously important.
I'm not saying it's not important. What I'm saying is, let's individually bring forward what's important, and that should have merit, whatever that idea is. And if it doesn't, if you're overconfident or whatever, you get challenged, then you might that. But I'm saying we should have something that we can all agree upon, like Stacey's saying. And I
Well,
think it's,
Stacy wanted to say something. No.
Yeah, and this is a perfect place to jump in because I hear what Colin's saying. So recently in listening to different TED Talks, YouTube videos from systems thinkers who maybe I can't remember their names, but I know their message was resonating with me. What I've noticed in a lot of the studies, and again, these are the people that I resonate with in the systems community, they use two different pathways to get something. So they have the same project going on in like two separate corridors. And I think that speaks to what's important to people. So somebody like Colin, the important question for him is going to be different than the important question for Doug, let's say. And so I think the idea of setting up two test situations for the same thing, but being able to approach it focused on different things in different order as would feel right to the people in that group is really important. We keep trying to do things one way. That doesn't make any sense. We need to figure out, we need to allow two separate systems to grow and then figure out how to blend them. And I think that's the point of history we're at now. And I do think this is a shifting point. And this is going to sound woo, but this is what I envision as like a feminine shift. We take the old world, the new world, and somehow they need to be blended in together.
well, I'm not sure about the blending. I'm not sure about the blending part,
Just take a breath first.
but I really like what you said. And I think that's what I'm trying to do, is to make different boundaries so that we can have Doug's space, Colin's space, Sam's space, where we appreciate each other's space and say, yes, I validate your space, but it's not where I want to play. But I see what's going on over there. And if I see anything I think that you can use, I'll definitely let you know. And I may even come and play once in a while if you don't mind me being there. And I say, no, we could definitely use your influence, but it doesn't come over and invalidate the space with, you must throw out the industrial frame and, whatever.
But Colin, what I'm saying is even some of these conversations that we have, we should do the first part first. First, we should split off and then figure out which people are having which conversations. That doesn't mean that each group can't be having the same conversation, but there has to be a different mechanism for, like I said, it's a blending together. So before we blend together, let each separate group weed out what's true. And there has to be a different way. That's all I can say. I have ideas how to do that.
Are you saying that if you have two perspectives, you have to begin by clarifying them as well as possible? And then when you've understood both of them, then they could be blended.
I'm not even going that far to speak of the content. I'm really speaking about a kind of thinker that should be in a conversation with another kind of thinker. And that has to be a combination of not just the way they think, but the way they emote. So for example, if I could just put in like math, okay, if you think of 0 to 10, I try to come in as a 5. And what I mean by that is if I have a span of 5, that means I might be able to reach 5 points over that way to understand and empathize with people who think that way, and 5 points over that way to think and empathize about people there. But if I come in as a 2, I'm only capable of stretching 3 points to the right. So what I'm saying is look for people that come in at a 4, 5, or 6. Let them communicate first. Let them figure out what they can agree upon first. Then we could branch out that way. And I think it would be a more diverse population.
Right.
Well, I've got our frame. We can use the frame we have. We've got unblocking frame and we've got a barn raising frame. Do we agree on that? We have those two frames.
Sure.
So we can start there and discussing the critical thinking of where we are and what we're trying to do. I assume sense making is why I'm here. That's what I said at the last unblock. So are you saying, Stacy, that we should have two separate unblockings, one for the woo unblockers and one for the science unblockers? Or are you saying the woo people should understand the science people and we should be able to merge in one unblocking session, respecting each other's points of view, having gone through the value searching process of what it is the other person is trying to bring of value? And as I try to slide things on the table with Doug or frame them, I seems to be that maybe I should be in unblocking 2, not in unblocking 1. There's
Yeah.
no way to merge it. So
I don't
if we
think you
can't put
can
the
call them,
boundaries there.
Yeah, that's really not what I'm saying, because a matter of fact, I disagree, you know, Glenn agreed, but I disagree with the two separate things. Because even within the groups, there are certain,
Well, I'm being very,
you can't call them woo people and science
yeah,
people.
I'm
That just
trying
doesn't
to
work.
be,
yeah, like I could see Glenn in
Okay,
either
well-
one of those groups.
All
I
of
can see
us are a
myself
mixture.
either one.
Yeah,
I-
there's not the woo people and science people. That makes no sense.
Right, exactly.
okay, well,
However,
let's characterize
I
in
have
whatever
to
label
say,
Stacy,
I'm gonna let Barry go, but I have to say.
whatever label
I
you
would
use,
not-
Stacy.
What? I would not,
When instead of woo and science, just use the labels you use, because you said the two different thinkers. That's all I meant.
That's what I wanted to contribute. I don't care for the axis that goes from woo to science. I think that's a useless axis.
harmful.
The axis that I would propose is the concrete thinkers versus the abstract thinkers. So some people are very concrete and want to talk in specific examples. Some people are very abstract and want to talk in abstract models. And what I find is that I know for a fact that I tend to be on the very abstract end of that spectrum. And if I'm talking to somebody who's on the very concrete end, there's not going to be any conversation, because neither of us are going to, I might understand a concrete example, but the concrete example doesn't get into all the abstract elements. So abstract versus concrete, I think that's a very scientific axis.
That's a good one.
I would not adopt a model involving woo versus scientific. I think that's a useless, maybe even a nonsensical axis, because the word woo, I don't even know what it means.
Yeah, that has proved.
Well, I think
I'll give you a concrete example here. This is a little funny. Yeah, so this is kind of like an example of a disagreement I often hear, and it's these two, and this one says, "I'm an apple," and this one says, "I disagree because I'm a banana," and this one says, "No, I'm an apple," and this one says, "No, I'm a banana." And this is, we see this kind of disagreements all the time. Well, I wouldn't call them disagreements, but that's what they call it.
That's a nice fruit.
But
Good
the
example
point
of
is,
communication.
The
point
abstract
is-
fruit is an abstract category.
That
But I
actually is the conversation with Doug that I experience. And I'm saying, are we going to talk about unblocking fruit, or are we going to just talk about bananas?
Okay, this is really important to me, though. I also want to point out that some of us are both. And I don't want to be put in one box or the other, because I'm a 5. I want to be able to go and be able to judge for myself.
most of us are mixtures of so
Yes.
many things.
Yes,
So many things. Most of them we don't
Absolutely.
even know ourselves.
Well, let me try to put something forward, and let me try to do it concisely and quickly. We wonder how much time we give somebody to express their idea and unpack it. Like, how many shows are we going to give them? How much time before you start to roll your eyes and say you're not bringing anything new, or you haven't showed me how to understand that? So there should be the opening to allow, like Stacy says, to bring forth whatever side she wishes. But there's a responsibility to prepare, write it down, and present it. And I asked Doug actually last week, he doesn't feel the responsibility for me to understand what he's trying to say. So I don't know how he meant that. We'd have to have, because he could have meant that many, many ways. So you can't interpret until you have a longer conversation, right?
I saw
think I
that.
know. I want to address that, because that was the point I was going to bring up when you just said that. Maybe we have to learn that we're speaking to the wrong audience. I've made that mistake my whole life. I am just learning now how not to do that. That's why I say you, and I'm going to say the universal you, may not be the right person for me to talk to about this because you are an apple and I am a banana.
You're bananas.
There will
But
be
we only
other-
have one. We
there-
only have one on blocking. We only
But
have one on
Colin,
blocking.
There
So we
may
have to
be
respect.
other, but okay.
Maybe
But
other
that-
avenues,
some-
other contexts.
Okay, so in something like unblocking, that's where we would have to defer to the people who are regarded as having more emotional intelligence as opposed to more concrete kind of knowing.
I'm
It
saying
depends-
go to the person ideas and their history of expressing it. That's all I'm saying. And if there's still more to be expressed, help them express it. But if they're just saying the same old thing over and over again, not taking any feedback, blah,
But
blah, blah.
yes, but my point is, maybe in this case, I don't mean to single you out. Maybe in this case, you are not the right person to judge that. Just like if somebody was coming to me with an engineering dilemma, I'm not the right person to judge that. Am I going to tell them that's the stupidest idea I ever heard? No, because I have no clue. I don't understand it.
Okay, so they're right there, Stacy. You've put your finger on the button of a we property. We have to help clear out the noise of the system. And there's a guy I watched that his whole career is about this noise effect in systems. And an individual can't take the noise out because an individual works on the plane of bias. But the noise is a system level, and only by having different conservatives and liberals and, a few libertarians involved does the noise come out of the system and you get what's quote unquote possibly better.
Can I
Fair
just
or
change that
something.
phrase? Can I just change the phrase and suggest that we think of it, instead of taking the noise out of the system, that we redirect and separate the percussion from the strings?
Sure.
They're
In
both
fact, I think you're advancing. You're advancing once you have it's garbage in, garbage out. So I'm saying once you get quality in, then you're saying, well, let's do something with it.
But
Well,
you're
I agree.
making the assumption, and this is where we keep getting stuck.
No, hold on. It's not my
Let me
assumption. It's this
finish.
guy's
Let
work.
me
It's
finish.
this guy's
You're
work. It's not my
making the
assumption.
assumption that there is something that is not of quality. That is the assumption that gets us stuck every time.
No.
So you just
I'm
said
saying
it.
that
We'll look
in
at the
systems-
transcript.
I'm saying in systems, there is this property called noise. And by having diverse viewpoints, you can limit the noise. It's a system property, not an individual property.
But
So you put your button on a we thing. We looking
But you
for
want
GCC.
some noise, right? You always want some noise. Right?
I think the universe is full of it. The universe is full of it.
Yeah. A good system must have some noise,
Yeah.
some randomness.
We can't
Otherwise-
grow without friction.
Hmm.
And I think your point about not being the sole source of truth as an individual is well worth noting. Because that's the bias, right? I can't pull out the system noise with my bias. I have to say to everybody, do you think it would be good? We have a meeting on meditation. Would that be a good use of our time? We haven't had one yet. This could be interesting. We could have fun and play. Or this is the 67th consecutive meeting on meditation. I don't think I'm going to keep going on with this group any longer.
That's
But
all-
could you?
So that's kind of,
Glenn, just one more quick thing. That's also why I think maybe we should be having 2 calls going on at the same exact time. And yes, we might not want to miss something, but maybe we could do it within the framework of 1 call, breakout rooms, come back, discuss, and then see if we want to go back to the breakout rooms or we want to continue.
yes,
That's entirely
and
doable.
prepare. Yes, and prepare them. Like Sam has got one.
No,
I think
Colin,
Caleb has one.
In the group that you're in, they can be prepared, but maybe in the group
Well,
that
Kayla's going to
I'm
do
in,
one.
they're not. So what I'm saying to you
Oh,
is
exactly.
we each have to
That's
be
right.
responsible for our particular space that we choose to come to,
Container.
and not our
Right.
container. Right. So if you think
Choosing not to prepare is a choice. Doug
Yeah.
says choosing to come empty is a choice.
But wait, apropos
That's
that, what happened last Sunday? Because I watched that whole thing, and what I saw was that Doug asked, he made an ask, and there was just no response whatsoever.
There was
No
one response by Alex.
I heard that, but it wasn't a
Yes, it was
response.
not considered.
It wasn't a willingness to try it.
I wasn't there. What was they
I
asking?
was willing. I was willing. I was trying to understand what the request was. I didn't understand the request. If you heard the session,
I heard the
voiced
whole
that
thing.
question.
Yeah, I heard that
Right.
too. Yeah, I heard the whole
And
thing.
while I've got a little bit of your attention, I believe there are ample opportunities for us to have breakout rooms independent of these larger sessions. If you want a breakout room, schedule it, do it. But the whole point of this session is to hear from everyone. I mean, why gather
Yeah.
people and then split them up again? You know, might as well schedule
Yes.
different things.
Exactly.
This is a rare opportunity to get everyone here, so we hear from everyone. And if you want to do breakout rooms, you're free to do, you know, any sessions at any time you want.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Okay.
just, you know what, though, Sam, I've been on calls where one question is given. We break out into smaller groups because it gives us a chance to get to know each other better and to have our voices heard.
Right.
But then we go back and we talk about it and we further discuss. But
Yes.
at least we have a little bit more of an understanding of at least the people we were in the smaller room with first. And then we can share that, but at least each of those
Okay.
little groups are coming together with some understanding. And it's just bringing things into
And that's
context.
completely fine. That's completely fine. But likewise, it is also completely fine for any question discussed here as a group to then say, I'm really interested in what Stacy thought about that, or Glenn. Let me contact them, you know, after the session. Let me find out. If you truly were interested, one would do that. Okay. It doesn't mean that it has to be one or the other, but I'm just saying that, you know, all of it can be accommodated. You know, it's not necessary to critique one and just say we're not doing the other.
This has been solved. This has been solved.
And it would be really great, like you said, like when you're saying schedule a call, I think Joshua's spoken to this before, and Colin and myself. It would be really great if there was a room available. You know, in the past, I've tried to do that, and I have to count on somebody else
Well,
helping me.
you don't need it recorded, right, to start with. But once it becomes bigger, we can find a way. Sam is
Yeah,
accommodating.
free Zooms can be up to 40 minutes, right? And that's my understanding. And yes, I did miss one time, Stacy. I apologize on that one.
I'm
I
not
just need
calling
to-
you out. It's not just you.
I'm just admitting to it. Okay, yes, it does take a little bit of coordination to do that. That doesn't mean that overall I'll generally miss every session. Typically, I won't, but in that case, I did. You know,
No,
so
but it's also a lot of responsibility to put on one or two people, is what I'm saying.
That was my point in the GCC we conversation on that proposal. Have we reached the milestone yet where Sam's gift to us can be picked up by the group itself responsible, and Sam just taking a supporting role like the rest of us? And, you know, I think I've come around on that, and I'm agreeing that, you know, there's a lot that one can do just consciously by saying, hey, Stacy, let's get together and talk about that question, yes, no idea, you know. And as far as you were saying that, what if we had just the example you guys were just talking about a second ago, a show, not the show that you were talking about, but another format. And this is my point. You can prepare whatever formats you want. Oh, I know what it was, the breakout rooms. So we could have questions that we're kind of dying to dig into. Like between me and Alex, I'd love to have a breakout room and bury the atheist snarky conversation so that we can agree that we're actually trying to bring something positive forward. And we talked about it today. We should spend our time on something more important than pulling ourselves down with this religion. So I think if we heard each other, it could be already done, because I'm not attacking somebody's personal faith or belief. What I'm saying is when you come to the global forum with great ideas, expect for them to be challenged. And if we're shining up something that's a really good idea and you bring in a little bit of religion on the side, it's like it's not going to be a problem because it's not the thing. You don't, you know, do I have to do that? No. But if you like, it's very nice. Here, you could try it. It's like, oh, no. I think I'll just keep helping over here, you know, and, you know, meditate my own way. So it's this certainty of system that people get in their heads that's debilitating, and arguing about the certainty of the Big Bang or the certainty of God and all those things. Those are the distractions. How about the certainty of climate change? How about the certainty of Alex's peer-to-peer idea? How about the certainty of us going back and having a memory in the group? So we could have, like you say, a breakout call. We could have a few of these topics that are unresolved, and we could have a fun day where one of the Thursdays is not Kayla giving a presentation or Jazz meditating or the Sam, as the second Saturday. We actually schedule and prepare different formats so we can respect the context and container. So I think we have to focus on there's not one size container for this show. So we have to craft the containers.
We already figured that stuff out, yeah.
We're not respecting it, I don't think, officially, formally.
But we know the model.
I'd like to. Yeah.
We know the model. The model's simple. Do it. If you want to do it, do it. Schedule it sometimes. Those who want to show up, so on.
Well, if you want to have a discussion on something like meditation or the beginning of the universe, those were very long conversations. It took a lot of time in this group. I don't know if that's what we want to talk about.
If you want to talk about that, you can schedule it.
Right, but I don't, I put a round table here, say, of these 5 ideas that we could talk about next week, what would people like to get into? And I think should be forming a pattern right now. And I think what it is critical thinking. And how do we learn to agree and disagree better? How do we use signaling? How to use digital tools to follow up and track? That's what I'm working on.
I think that's connected to critical thinking, isn't it? I mean, it's
how do we keep build the memory? And when I got
there's a block.
Go ahead, Alex.
When earlier in the show you came on heavy about me being a fundamentalist believer in some deity through AA.
Yeah, just stop doing that, please. Just stop doing that, please. And we're going to be fine. Yeah, forget about it, and we're going to be fine.
Well, it wasn't
forget
true.
About that, because that was my response to you saying I was talking about atheists.
It's important that
let me finish. It's important, isn't it?
Yes.
Because it's not true. It's not true. I don't believe in a deity.
Hey, we're talking over each other now.
Can I finish? I'm the one with the microphone at the moment, and I'm talking about that untruth that's important. It's important to the group. If you tell somebody they're a liar on the screen, it's not true, then it should be exposed. So Colin accused me of being a fundamentalist believer in a deity through AA, but that's not true. I joined AA and had an awakening, an epiphany, without bowing to any religious deity. And that's why I'm writing a book about it. That's why the peer group asked me to write a book. They urged me to write a book because it'll be a bestseller like Eckhart Tolle's Awakening.
Can we just please stop that thread right here? Because I guarantee you, if we go down this path, we can discuss this for 5 months and we're not going to come anywhere. Okay. It was a dumb thing by Colin to say, let's forget about it.
Yeah, forget about it.
Yeah, Colin apologized. Colin apologized later by coming back and saying that Alex has got a good idea.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I think you misunderstood me because I'm not wrapping you in with the example. You were just part of the example, so the example wasn't all about you. So that could be some of the conflation. I was saying, as far as you're concerned, I respect the fact that you feel, and I'll just say this for everybody to hear. I respect the fact that you feel that helped you, and I'm glad to hear you're writing a book about it. And I'm not rolling my eyes. I'm thinking that's a good news. The thing I'm saying is that doesn't mean everybody has to believe in a higher power to be healed from alcoholism. And it's in the AA's tenets that they say, so it's kind of wishy-washy or whatever. But I have heard you say in the past about, similar today too, again, about how the number of people believing in something makes it true. So when we're talking about truth, that's a different discussion than talking about somebody having personal mental tools that help them.
I didn't say that either.
I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what I'm saying is I'm not attacking, and I want you to know, Alex, I'm not attacking you. Okay. So whatever I said, you're in the clear. What I have heard you say that you do justify it though, and it has something to do with your AA meetings, that there's a higher power and you believe it, and that's the way it is. And we've talked about Adam and Eve and the tree of good and evil and all that stuff. So we shouldn't really have any arguments. We should be enjoying these conversations, really.
Yeah, we're in the clear.
Well, yeah.
We're in the
Well,
clear.
Thank you. Thank
Before
you. I did.
Ken's head explodes, can I just say one thing? I think the only thing that absolutely needed to be said, and we would have been able to move on, is I think Alex should have just said one sentence. I am not a fundamentalist. Period, the end. And if him and Colin wanted to talk about it further so that Alex could explain his position, they do that. We don't want to hear the whole thing. We know it all. But Alex absolutely has a right to say one sentence.
So
I
then-
am not a fundamentalist.
That's a good sentence, and it's a very simple learning experience here, you know, not to put all kinds of assumptions onto people. You just have to be a little careful with
Well,
those kind of
hold on.
formulations.
The memory part, Sam mentioned it today. We shouldn't have to keep forgetting. We should have some foundation. And the foundation, I would say, is we already know everybody here is not a fundamentalist.
Right.
So if Alex hears me calling him a fundamentalist, I would rather in his head, he says, oh, he's talking about somebody else and he's talking about me and he's talking about all kinds of stuff. I wish he'd keep his point more clear.
But then you
That would be,
shouldn't
you know.
attach his name to it because somebody watching doesn't know what we know.
I'll have to
so-
look back, but I don't think I attached in my mind Alex as a fundamentalist. I'm saying there are fundamentalists,
Oh, yeah, exactly.
but I'm saying
So
Alex is somebody. No, okay, let me attach Alex
this
to
is
the
clear and
conversation. The only reason
simple.
Alex-
This is
Yeah,
clear and simple. There's no fundamentalists in the room. We can move on.
Right.
Thank you very much for the music. Okay,
Well, there is-
please.
actually, there is a point.
I have to go. I'm
I
going.
will leave it on in the
Okay.
background.
Actually, there is a point though. Sam actually said, I can see why Colin can take offense with woo and woo woo. And I don't even remember bringing it up specifically. And then Alex went next.
I don't remember
So-
saying that today. Did I say that today?
Yeah, you said, I said, I'm not exactly sure what he means by it, but I think he's getting the point across somehow. You know, I think it's generally speaking, there's, you know, yeah. So, and then that's when Alex jumped off. I didn't even bring it up, for Christ's sake. At least I don't remember. But that's okay, because I think we should be able to learn to not stub our toes on what we have a theory of mind of the other people in the group. I don't think anybody here is forcing religion down my throat. I don't think anybody here is a fundamentalist. So if I use those examples of world problems, don't think it's about you. Is Joshua actually here?
Yep.
Hey, dude, what's up?
I'm listening, and I think that's the most important thing we can all do is just listen to each other to gain more knowledge.
So did you, you've listened to quite a bit of today. What do you think about the GCC we that might be forming and the formats and the different things? Because you know I've been beating this drum for a long time. And Stacy brought up you and I hammering on the having Zoom accounts. And then we came to the realization together that we each have our own private Zoom account. And if we want to schedule a meeting on Friday at 7 and 3 of us do it, then you have a choice whose meeting you want to go to. But we should try to coordinate, but that's not really the point. Is that the way I understand it?
I don't see your point at all. You said that's not your point. So
Well-
what is your point?
Instead of using Clubhouse, how's Clubhouse going?
Fantastic, actually. Some of the most amazing conversations I've ever had.
Yeah, well, I don't have to talk about the GCC we. If you don't understand what I'm talking about, then we don't need to go over it a third time because it's just a matter of milestones and the GCC entity. And in reality, we are in a clubhouse. And I think Sam made that point today, like to Stacy, if you want to have a reach out and have a one-on-one or breakout rooms. Remember we went through all that breakout room stuff?
Uh-huh.
This Clubhouse does breakout rooms too, right?
No,
Oh, it doesn't. See?
it's not the same thing. It's not, it doesn't work that way. It's everything's a breakout room.
Yeah.
In other words,
Pretty
right
much.
now, if you want to have a breakout room, we could do that right now, but we don't. So it's great. I think this was a great conversation today. I really enjoyed everyone listening to each other. And I really thought, Sam asked the question if we stayed focused. And I thought today was one of the first times in a long time that it really kept focused the whole time through. So I thought it was great. Thank you guys, everyone.
Right on, Josh. Yeah, and I still feel a little bit of the tension with the difference between unblocking and barn raising. And I'm hoping that both forums can be usable by a global audience. I don't know what that really means.
Well, you'll never know until you invite the global audience to the conversation.
Well, we're all over the world, but yeah, it's
Well, that's why I said use Clubhouse, because if we were all on Clubhouse right now, the audience could organically just grow, and anyone that wanted to come up to stage can raise their hand and come on up, and it's exponential. It's in I think over 13 to 15 million people now.
yeah.
So
Yeah,
that's not
that's what
bad.
you're saying.
It might be even more than that at this moment. So that's a nice, good chunk of the world. I think around 15 to 20 million people is a good conversation.
Yeah, I actually see I see GCC Clubhouse as kind of like an offshoot. You don't need to do
Well,
one or the other.
why don't you
go
join the
cross media.
conversation? It's happening all the time, the GCC Clubhouse.
I didn't
Come
even
on
know there
in.
was one.
Water's good. It's going
Well,
24/7 whenever you want.
it's
Just become a
available on
member.
Android now. Yeah, it's
Yep.
available on Android. I should pick up that extra tool. The toolbox is
Awesome.
getting heavy.
Sorry, I can only listen. I got the kid here, so I'm going to be quiet and just keep listening. Thank you, guys.
All right, Josh, we'll talk to you later. So Alex, are we good?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about a group, a community group, a charity or a business trying to attract more customers, more followers, and they wouldn't, well, say what they would do. They would try and accommodate as many people and faiths and different beliefs as they could. They'd say that okay, you people have fundamentalist beliefs and you're entitled to them, but come along anyway because their door is open. Over.
Well, I don't think you would want to actually filter people by their religion, because that's kind of bigoted. So you wouldn't want to say, even though you're this, you can come anyway. I would just try to put forward the proposal that I've been putting for this group is we're a secular space. You can come no matter who you are, but realize that nobody is going to call Trump in the card game, right? Your ideas are what get judged on merit. Somehow, through some system that we can call essentially reliable. The scientific method is one,
Yeah.
but you can't measure everything, right? So when you get into the woo side of things, like homeopathy,
Yeah.
Chinese medicine, you get
Homeopathy's
into
been exposed in double-blind
fortune
tests.
tellers.
But there's an issue that comes up with accepting other people who have vastly different insane woo-woo beliefs. And there's a lot of them, and we've got to keep that in mind. If you alienate them, then you've lost them.
Well, that's what I was proposing people adapters for. I know it's a very cold word, but if you think about those two different spaces, if you put in between those boundary and adapter where respect can get through, where it is warranted, and that's the point. Like I was mentioning earlier about Alex O'Connor in his recent video, he's called the Cosmic Skeptic, and he just recently put out a video on why Muslims are so sensitive about being criticized, right? And that's a case point right there. That most of the things, that's a case in point to really what I'm talking about here. And my added point after Sam added a point was that at the end, I'm adding the point that what you need to do is ask questions of each other and reply, but you don't put out a death warrant. Like the government put out a death warrant for Saddam and Rushdie, right? If you go to certain countries, they'll kill
That
you
wasn't,
if you are of a certain
it
type
wasn't a
of
government.
person.
It wasn't a government. It
Yeah,
was
no,
a
no, it
religious
was.
sect.
It was.
It was a religious sect.
Okay, well,
It was masquerading as a government.
well, maybe I think you may be able to split some hairs there, but essentially it was an authoritative body that millions of people are listening to, like Sam was talking about.
Yeah, that's why
So
they
whether
keep
they were
politics. That's why they divide religion and politics in democracies.
not there, they don't.
No, well, it's not a
Yeah, right,
democracy.
exactly.
They don't call that a
Right.
democracy, and I don't call it a
Well,
government either.
and then thinking about this frame of mind we're in right now, it's easy to see why you can't just say if everybody just and then fill in the blank, because everybody's looking different directions, being influenced by different tribes, whether they're born that way, born into it, and raised that way. So I think the saying is, give me a man until he's 7, or give me a boy until he's 7, and I'll give you the man. Like,
yeah, that's
yeah,
what religion. That's what religion can do to people. But the thing is,
well, no, that's what raising somebody can do to people. And if you raise them in religion, or you raise them in Tao Ching, or you raise them in humanism, think for themselves.
It's the same thing as what I said. Most children are brought up in some household with a family, and the parents are either in the 80% of the world population that follows some spiritual belief, or they're in the 20% that's humanists or atheists.
Well, that's changing all the time, but and all I'm saying is, why don't we focus our sight? I'm saying, why don't we focus our sight on the ideas of what we can do to co-vision, like the goals and pillars of this group, co-vision and understand each other. And if we have to understand where we're different, that's okay. We're allowed to be different. But if we get arrogant and overconfident, and as Stacy said earlier, try to judge for the system, an individual component of the system, judging the system, that doesn't work. So, we have to be able to find a way to not let people like our problem earlier was, I think we were just saying way too many things without verifying them. If we could have just had a conversation back and forth like we were sitting in a coffee shop, it never would have got argumentative, I don't think. Anyway, go ahead, Stacy.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Just really, this really struck me. I want to say something that's going to sound very provocative, but it goes to what's happening in the real world. So like in my community, a school board meeting was just canceled because they were stormed by anti-maskers and they wouldn't put their mask on. And I think that I am really at this point for segregating the school, having half the school being for people willing to either get vaccinated and wear masks, having the other half of the school for people who don't want to wear masks, don't believe it's necessary, and let the teachers that don't want to be vaccinated teach those kids, and let the ones that do want to be vaccinated teach the others. Then each group will have to readjust for the bed that they made. And I just wanted to put that out there. And I got to go back to my cooking. Thank you for letting me interrupt.
No problem. That sounds very similar to the idea of a conversation that we have where there's a disagreement. We go out into separate Zoom rooms. And I'm saying that's not the way to go, not the way to segregate. Like the school was meant for all the kids. The parents shouldn't take over the purpose of shining the good of the school by saying, no, those are different kids. I think that would be devastating.
But Colin, people shouldn't do a lot of things, but they do.
They should close the school. If they can't
handle
close the school. Close the school.
None of our kids go to school. That makes no sense.
Well, they get either homeschooled or whatever, because the government shouldn't pick favorites. If they ruin it, they ruin it. They have to come together and realize that the school is for a single purpose. And that's what we have to do.
How is that picking a favorite? To allow half of the school to organize the way they see fit and the other half of the school to organize the way they see fit. How is that picking favorites?
I'm saying it's a favorite mission, the mission statement of the education system versus the mission statement of a bunch of emotional rednecks. Maybe not rednecks, but
Well,
People
wanna
who
add
are,
I want to add one more thing, which I think is even more interesting. So interesting that I'll come on camera. I think the most interesting thing is when I've said this, the anti-maskers and the maskers both agree it's a good idea. So that alone would be a reason to try it. Both groups think it's a good idea.
yeah, well, I guess the society starts to eat itself out from within. That's how they go down. The rot starts there. I'm just saying that the school has what I think is the right idea to teach children, all colors. It doesn't, all religions, in you come to the school.
We're not segregating we're not segregating based
And
on
there's a
something that
disease
you can't
out there.
change.
There's a disease out there.
This is the
There's a
important
virus out there.
Colin,
Get vaccinated.
the
If you don't
important
get
part.
vaccinated, don't come to school.
Again, then you're
about that?
taking your belief and you're saying it's more important than anybody else's. The difference
Have
between
you
this
seen polio? Have you
the
seen polio?
the difference between this type of segregation is people can choose what group they go into. They're not placed in a group based upon something that's not within their control. That's the difference. And you know what? Maybe they will decide, you know what? I should mask because I don't like this so much. And maybe they won't. Maybe they'll all die off. Not my problem.
Darwin, take the wheel.
Exactly. And that's also not to say that we can't share that kind of space because we still have one physical building. To me, that's coexistence.
Good fences make good neighbors.
Well, I'm checking out. See you all tomorrow.
Bye. Okay. I'm gonna check out too. Take care, everyone.
See you later, Stacy.
Yes, please.
Oh, by the way, Sam, if you're listening, Zoom allows unlimited time if it's only 2 people, the free Zoom. If there's 3 or more, then there's the 40-minute. But there's also this other free system called Jitsi, JIT.SI. And I tested it and it let me have 3 people for more than 40 minutes. So you might want to look into Jitsi if you want to have a multi-party session with without the 40-minute time limit. But I only tested it once, so I could be mistaken about that. And with that, I think I'm done too. So Colin, I will leave you to have a charismatic rant at Sam if you like. Bye-bye.